Greetings, friends. It's your old pal Kevin, just here to let you know that you can support How To Wrestling by heading over to patreon.com/How To Wrestling and becoming our lovely backer. If you want to get access to show notes, exclusive pay-per-view full-length episodes with Joe's amazing new fan perspective on all the happenings of wrestling, going all the way back to SummerSlam 2015. If you want to join me for some live streaming, playing some WWE 2K17, or if you want to request an episode, maybe as a gift for a loved one, or maybe just some topic that you have to have covered on How To Wrestling, much like Christopher Hollinshead has done for this very episode, you can do that by becoming our backer. Head over to patreon.com/How To Wrestling for more information. But for now, enjoy this episode of How To Wrestling. It's How To Piper. Greetings, friends, and welcome to another episode of How To Wrestling, the world's first wrestling podcast detailing how to wrestling, how to get into wrestling, how to understand wrestling, and goodness knows, maybe even how to enjoy wrestling. And we are joined today on this most auspicious of occasions, looking at one of wrestling's greatest talkers, one of wrestling's greatest villains, and one of the most hyped, over-the-top characters from the 1980s and beyond. It's How To Piper. We're looking at Rowdy Roddy Piper. I'm Kevin Mann, resident explainer of wrestling things, joined by my partner in life, my partner in crime, and my co-host in this wrestling podcast, Joe Graham.
Howdy.
How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well. I think you went with howdy there.
I'm experimenting.
Howdy Hoddy Hyper over here. Is this kind of you're trying to rebrand yourself and get away from hi?
Well, we've tried a few variations of my entrance, haven't we?
Yeah.
I think I've tried howdy before.
Have you? See, we must say Joe's listening to old episodes of How To Wrestling at the moment, so maybe like you're kind of become really conscious about how you say
which
hello.
Which ones worked
stuff.
well, which ones
know.
didn't.
If you want Joe to say howdy, send in hashtag Joe Howdy.
How to howdy.
How to howdy. But if you rather if she goes hi, just go how to hi. It's easy peasy, you know.
Has to be high with like 7 or 8 eyes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that might be where we get into difficulty, you know, totting up those hashtags. How you doing, Joe?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well. Are you excited to talk about Rowdy Roddy Piper?
I'm excited. I'm a little bit nervous.
A little bit? Why are you nervous?
Oh, come on now.
He is born to controversy,
He is.
Rowdy Roddy Piper. So, Rowdy Roddy Piper is a name which I'm of a good chance, if you're a new fan or you're someone who's watched very little or no wrestling, that there's a good chance you've heard this name before, or at least something to do with Rowdy Roddy Piper. I think he's one of those wrestlers who managed to shatter out of the wrestling bubble and kind of supplant himself in mainstream consciousness.
Definitely. I mean, I knew him from Celebrity Wife Swap. So, huge cultural influence he's had.
I mean, I know particularly in America, because we'll get into how Roddy was involved in everything from MTV to Hollywood movies and feuds with like every celebrity in the 80s and beyond. But I mean, had you much knowledge of Roddy Piper before we kind of delved into him here?
No, before we delved into him, I had seen him in, first of all, Celebrity Wife Swap, which is what I don't know why you showed me.
I don't know.
I cannot remember. It's when we first met and you were like, let's watch Celebrity Wife Swap with Ric Flair and Rowdy. 2 wrestlers you've never seen or know anything about.
And to this day, like, we've not done How To Flair. I mean, you know Flair from, you know, managing Charlotte, but you've not really seen much of wrestling.
I know Flair from that awkward car ride with Charlotte where he was emotionally distant.
I hate my daughter. But you saw these gentlemen on Celebrity Wife Swap, so I mean, you were aware of them from that?
Yeah, exactly.
So Joe is after watching a whole mess of Rowdy Roddy Piper. We watched Born to Controversy, the WWE produced documentary on him. We watched a shed load of Piper's Pits. We watched They Live. We watched a whole bunch of matches. Joe, for new fans who are maybe trying to dip their toes into the rowdy waters of Rowdy Roddy Piper, how would you describe him in a sentence or two?
Okay, he's really good on the mic. He wears a kilt. He's, in inverted commas, Scottish.
How big are those inverted commas like?
People love him. That's the main thing I know about him is how much people fucking love Roddy Piper.
And where does that kind of come from? Is that from like the tweets which we've been getting in, or just generally when you've seen him mentioned? Or
both, yeah. Tweets when we've seen him mentioned, general influence on pop culture, he's in so much.
He's the gentleman who passed away pretty much quite close to when you started watching wrestling. Okay. But yeah, Piper was kind of a shocking death around 2015, and I think maybe when you start watching wrestling and it starts off with an outpouring of grief for like one of the big legends, that's probably going to reveal how much he meant to a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people grew up with Rowdy Roddy Piper. He's a big part of their lives. What I will say for Rowdy Roddy Piper is that he is known as being the best on the microphone ever.
Wow.
And he's good when pretty much anyone else you could put in that category or a contender for that, like Michael CM Punk is better or whoever is better, all those people always actually point to Rowdy Piper and go, actually he's the best of all time.
Wow.
Rowdy Roddy Piper, a wizard on the microphone, never the greatest wrestler, but that was a man who knew how to make people hate him and he knew how to make people love him, and that's something which I'm very excited for us to get into the hows and whys of that over his long, lengthy, legendary career. But Joe, before we get into all of that and all the nitty gritty of Roddy Piper, what did you learn in wrestling this week? Hang on, I'm gonna get my whistle. There we go. I've gotten better, haven't I?
That's incredible. Have you been taking lessons from Rowdy Roddy Piper then?
Yeah, I have actually. You listen to enough bagpipe music on a DVD menu.
Just pick it up.
You just pick it up, like.
Yeah. So this week I learned in wrestling that Brock Lesnar and John Cena are the same age.
Yeah, that's like for a lot of people that's like, well, what's the big deal about that? But for you, that's earth-shattering.
Yes, it's important because it solidifies a theory that I have, which is I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I think that John Cena was grown in a lab by Vince McMahon, and I also think Brock Lesnar was grown in a lab by Vince McMahon.
So you're expanding on your fan theory here now.
Yeah. So my new fan theory is that Vince McMahon grew both of these men in a lab, but there was a horrible mutation gone wrong. And one of the genetics on one of them sort of mutated and evolved and morphed into this horrible man beast that we now know today as Brock Lesnar. So John Cena and Brock Lesnar are essentially good and evil sides of the same mutated creation that came from Vince McMahon's lab.
So one became a man beast, one became a boy beast, is what you're basically saying. That's right. There's an episode of Ren and Stimpy where they split Ren into his evil half and his ambivalent half. And I feel like that's kind of what's happened here with John Cena and Brock Lesnar. They were in the same class together in developmental wrestling. They
Are
came up
you
with the
serious?
Yeah, they came up with exactly the same time. Like,
I'm just saying they are polar opposites of each other. One does charity work like every waking hour of his day, helps new emerging talent in his own personal gym. The other lives in a cabin on a mountaintop where even his own manager has to drive out into the middle of nowhere to go contact him.
One refuses to marry his bae. The other one
Stalked and harassed her until...
The other one broke into, as yet at the time, not his bae's house and made her his bae.
Yes, seriously.
So, man, different sides of the same fucked up, giant, muscular, vascular coin are John Cena and Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
So, Rowdy Roddy Piper, hailing from Glasgow, Scotland. Not Glasgow, because that's an actual place, okay? Glasgow is this weird made-up place I think wrestling created for Roddy Piper to wrongly make everyone think that's what Scottish people are like.
Is it spelt the same as Glasgow?
It is, but they always pronounce it as from Glasgow, Scotland. Wow. Rowdy Roddy Piper. We might as well address this right at the start, going back to the start of Piper's life and times. He's not Scottish.
Really?
Were you? Did you expect him to be Scottish? Or?
I thought maybe he'd have some kind of Scottish lineage or something. But I'm not that surprised that he hasn't got that at all.
He doesn't do a Scottish accent.
No.
Piper's got a kind of a strange upbringing. The reason why he identifies as being Scottish, or did it throughout his career, is that he lived in like a whole bunch of places when he was a kid. He had quite a troubled upbringing. And I will say, after looking up about Roddy Piper and trying to do research about him and trying to discover about him, was jolly well difficult, because even though Roddy Piper has done hundreds and hundreds of documentaries, books, interviews, all that such, there's a lot of kind of shrouded in mystery about his upbringing and whatnot. The most that we can ascertain is that he definitely left home very, very young, and he had a very bad time at home from a young age.
Yeah, it said in the documentary that he left home at 15, and it's just like literally one night he just left and never looked back, which makes me think something really fucking bad happened.
And I don't want to start off on a real dark point here, and I'm very conscious of the fact that this is, someone who's, a legend and, beloved and whatnot, but you can't ignore this, like, from the get-go, which is Roddy has had, like, horrible shit happen to him throughout his life.
Yeah.
And when you're looking back at interviews with Roddy and discussions with Roddy and stories about Roddy, that's the number one thing to bear in mind, is that, I don't want to say, he wasn't all there, but Roddy definitely had a troubled upbringing, and he had a lot of difficulty getting on with people in certain points in his career. There's allegations that stuff happened to him. Everything from, sexual, physical abuse, mental abuse. All this stuff has been kind of, alleged to have happened at different points in his career. And what's difficult about it is that Roddy was always so in love and protective of the wrestling business, and particularly the fraternity, the community of wrestlers, that he would very rarely talk about a lot of the stuff that had happened. Like, it was a sign of weakness and whatnot. I mean, there was an interview I was watching with him, one he did with Kayfabe Commentaries, where it literally seemed like right off the bat, like, they were saying that he was, sexually assaulted by another wrestler for favors, essentially. And he just won't talk about it. He's like, he's in that headspace, he's about to say something, and he's just like, man, and this, you gotta be a man, and he just kind of trails off.
Yeah, you gotta be a man and suppress every inch of anything horrible that's ever happened to you, and just wait until that fosters into a horrible drug addiction or a crippling mental illness.
He's had a really hard go of it, and I don't mean to start off on like a really horrible point, but like when you talk about someone leaving home when they're a fucking teenager, and literally not like,
don't do that for no reason.
No,
it's not the kind of thing. It's like, mom made me clean my room, I'm gonna leave and become a wrestler. In the terrifying... What year was it when he became a wrestler? Like,
70s.
Yeah, fucking rough shit.
Of all the time to get into wrestling, like...
That's a bad place you're coming from if that's where you're heading to.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Piper, he went in, he was like 15 years old pretty much straight away. He was, he was living on the streets. He moved around quite a lot, foster homes. He lived in Saskatoon in Canada. He lived on a Native American reservation for a while. He did actually live in Glasgow very briefly. But originally he is Canadian. That is Piper's actual...
I didn't know he was Canadian.
Yeah, he is Canadian. That's where Piper is actually technically from. But yeah, leaving home that age, and there was a lot of hazing involved, I think, when you're that age.
He mentioned some of it on... what was the documentary that we watched? What was that called?
Born to Controversy.
Born to Controversy, yeah. He mentioned some of the hazing that he received when he was first there, which I suppose is... I mean, you hear about some of the stuff that's happened, even recently. Mm. And that's like older wrestlers that have already kind of paid some of their dues. A 15-year-old back then... coming with no experience, I'm not at all surprised. It's horrible.
I mean, I think we did Hey to Heyman recently, and there's like lovely kind of moments where it's like, it's Heyman and all these legends of wrestling, and they're like, hey, yeah, this young cool kid, come on, let's learn, and let's sit around the learning tree and learn. And like with Piper, it's more kind of, you go rewind 10 years previous to when Heyman was getting in and where Heyman was getting in. You're talking about like, down south in some of these kind of rougher areas where wrestling was like, handgun on the dashboard, bottle of fucking Jack Daniels, we're driving down the highway drinking beer and smoking spliffs, and people trying to fight wrestlers for real, protect the business at all counts. Yeah. It's a hard time to get into wrestling, So, Roddy, like, getting into wrestling, he had a lot going for him. He actually could play those bagpipes. That was not a gimmick.
That blew my mind, because I'm well aware of... I lived in Scotland very briefly, and I'm very well aware of how difficult bagpipes are to learn. They
fucking hard.
One of the hardest instruments. And that's incredible that he just... So how did he learn?
Something he picked up, like,
you don't
in as many...
pick up bagpipes.
It's a question mark, honestly.
He must have been like hanging out with some bagpipe players, and they must have peer pressured him into it.
I mean, one will assume, like, if he did live in Glasgow or lived in Scotland very briefly, as he claimed, that's probably when he did it. But I mean, there's stories of him, and again, with a lot of Piper's upbringing, a lot of his past, some of it can be exaggerated or not, but there's stories of him like entering like the World Bagpiping Championships and all this stuff. And I used to laugh because there was a Louis Theroux documentary that he did on wrestling way back in 2000, and he went to WCW at the time, and he very briefly chatted with Roddy Piper, and he's like, can I look in your bag, Roddy? And he's like, yeah, really? And so he opens up his bag, he's like, I got my knee pads in here, got my bagpipes, never leave home without them. I remember like when I saw that, like, yeah, fucking right. Like, what a fucking carny this Roddy Piper is. He pretends to play bagpipes, and he brings them with him everywhere. What a fucking lie. And then, like, randomly, like, I watched like Legends House or some documentary, he pulls them out like, he can like fucking play bagpipes. It's amazing, like.
And he was playing them at a really young age.
Yeah,
It's like,
really young.
He says that his pipe band would play him to the ring.
Isn't that so cute?
That is so cute, but also I didn't know a pipe band was a thing.
My pipe band, like.
Yeah, fuck John Cena and Brock Lesnar. This week I learned in wrestling that pipe bands exist.
And they can play your friends out to the ring
Yeah,
if
it's
they
cute.
become wrestlers. So with the hazing and whatnot and the kind of getting into wrestling at that young of an age, you're basically talking about getting the shit knocked out of you for 5 years all over the world.
He mentioned at one point being literally like piled into a van. This is like when he left home basically and he like became a wrestler. They literally piled him into a van and like took him out to become a wrestler, and that was it. It's terrifying. How does that happen? Like, again, what is going on there? Like, how did he know these people?
Well, what happened with Roddy was that he was living like the YMCA, and he was homeless, you know, so he had to like live in this place, and it was like 25 cents a night to stay or whatever, and he was running out of money, and his priest or whoever it was like, you know, I know a guy who can get you a wrestling match if you need a bit of money, and literally was just like a body to go and get the shit knocked out of, and there you go, and it's like, hey, do you want to basically make 3 months rent by doing a couple of nights work? Yeah, sure, in the van, off you go. So like, you can argue about how much of a choice Roddy had in terms of entering the wrestling world, but I always think that this is the most important thing when trying to get into that mindset of Roddy Piper, as confusing as it can be, is that for him that felt was a lifeline. He always thought that it was a lifeline, that he was basically facing, here's the streets and here's being homeless and nowhere to go and no one to look after you. Here's wrestling. Here's a group of guys who are looking after you in their own fucked up way. They're hazing you, but you're learning this skill. They're very protective of this special business. They're trying to make you appreciate how special it is and how lucky you are to be let into this fraternity of wrestling.
I suppose under those circumstances, it would be very easy to feel as though the wrestling industry was your family. When you haven't had a family, really, and then that's what you go into.
Oh, Roddy always viewed that. Always. And I think there's a lot of it that Roddy felt that he owed wrestling a lot because of that fact.
But then they do shit like, they drove out in the middle of nowhere one time and just left him there.
Yeah.
Literally just left him there and made him walk
27
back.
miles from the arena.
Treat him like Byron Saxton. I mean, that's just cruel.
You do not treat Roddy Piper like Byron Saxton. But I mean, when I saw Roddy do a spoken word thing live, and he talked about like some of the guys who he rode with at this time, and like legitimate like madmen, like some of the shit, the crazy fucking stories, like it's the stuff of like, you know, TV shows. You didn't think real life was like this.
Really?
Yeah, like Roddy always was super protective of the wrestlers themselves and felt that because they brought him in that he felt he needed to kind of look after them. Someone actually sent in, it was really, really sweet. It's probably one of the sweetest things I've ever seen in wrestling. Someone sent in a tweet, Piper, around about this time, when maybe a couple of years after this, he had written a little, just like 2 sides of A4, handwritten, and it was basically like, protecting the business, here's your guide if you're new into wrestling, here's how to look after yourself, here's how to make sure that the promoters don't take advantage of you. He would write things like, gas is going up 5 cents a litre, you know, this year, so you make sure you ask the promoter to give you an increase for your travel. And he's like, you know, don't, you know, like you find out how much these guys are being paid, make sure that you're getting paid right, getting paid on time. You know, if these promoters have screwed you over, let us know and we'll spread the word around. And Piper would write this up. He would copy 1 million copies of it. Every dressing room he went into, he'd just leave a stack of them. And he said the names like by Mr. K. Fabe, like he wouldn't write his name on it. And it was just him trying to help new young guys because he had been in that position and knew how easy it was to be taken advantage of.
That's really sad but nice.
It is. It's really nice. And I think Roddy's heart was always in the right place a lot of the time as it pertains to, you know, his views on promoters and his views on the wrestlers themselves. He always took quite an anti-promoter stance. And I think maybe a lot of that could be down to, you know, when he was young, he was taken advantage of by a lot of promoters. Because, you know, a lot of the promoters weren't so nice back then. Case in point, Roddy's first match, which he claimed would set the all-time wrestling record for shortest match. It was like 10 seconds bell to bell. He was thrown in. He didn't even know how to wrestle. He didn't even know if it was real or if it was fake. Literally out there, off you go, wrestle. And you know who he wrestled against?
Who?
There's a guy called Larry the Axe Hennig.
Wait, Hennig, as in
Kurt Hennig's dad.
Oh, Curtis dad.
Yeah, it was Kurt Hennig's dad, Curtis Axel's grandfather, Larry the Axe Hennig. wrestle Roddy Piper in his first match.
That's cool.
He gets some glimpses in this, like a documentary where they're talking about like, all the different places you went, Roddy. He's like, I fucking hate Japan so much. He's no horrible shit happened to him wherever he went, it's really horrid. But Piper started to make his name for himself with his mouth, because Piper was never the best wrestler, but he could fucking talk him in the building. Like, a lot of Piper's stuff, and I'll be honest, this is one of these situations where you go back and you watch it with a new fan, and it's very difficult to explain. And much like your racist uncle at Christmas dinner, trying to explain is very difficult, but trying to ignore is just as difficult. But a lot of the way that Piper made his name for himself as a heel back in the day was by race baiting, which was essentially, here's Piper standing in the middle of the ring in Los Angeles with a large Hispanic audience, making fun of Chavo Guerrero and making fun of Mexican people, says he's going to apologize by playing the Mexican national anthem, and he plays the cucaracha on the bagpipes.
Yep.
This is not the first nor the last time. That was Piper in the 70s and the 80s. That was his modus operandi. That was how, fucking the 90s as well. I don't want to stand up and go, well, times were different, so it was okay. Or Piper wasn't the only one to do it, so it was okay. It's not okay. That's just the way wrestling got a lot of people in the building back in those days. We got a Hispanic audience going to say stuff that's going to rile people up. It was just a way to get heat. And then those people will pay money to see Roddy Piper get the shit knocked out of him by Chavo Guerrero, because he's only a stupid, phony, fake wrestler, big mouth, but Chavo Guerrero, he can kick his ass.
Yeah.
Or, be it Mr. T or whoever it was is going to kick this guy's ass because he's just in there running his mouth. But you can't shy away from that fact that a lot of Piper's notoriety came from him riling up different racial groups.
It's funny because before we did this episode, I knew that he was known for his promos and that he was considered one of the best on the mic. I had no idea about all the racism and shit like that. No idea.
WWE have done quite a good job of sweeping a lot of this.
Not just WWE, I'd say a lot of fans and the wrestling sort of community does quite a good job of but we don't talk about.
Yeah, it is.
That.
It is, and it's.
It was different then.
It's hard for me as well because I didn't grow up with Piper.
Yeah.
So this is going to sound completely different if it was coming from someone who grew up in the 80s and was much more aware of what it was like back then and how it was perceived back then. And obviously as well, as a white lad, taught about how offensive it is I can't speak on their behalf, but it is worth bearing in mind that Piper and wrestling had a serious penchant for race baiting back in those days. That was one of their main ways of getting people in the door. And it's not just bad guys saying it to rile up the crowd. It worked the other way as well. There were so many instances of the 80s and 70s of here's the evil Russian, here's the evil Nazi, here's the evil Japanese guy.
They still do that shit now.
Yeah, they do. I guess they're a little bit more.
Oh yeah, of course it's not nowhere near as bad, but it's
the baby
still happening
faces
now.
ain't using racial slurs to rile up the crowd like they were back then.
They'll be much more vague with their racism.
It's just worth bearing in mind that wrestling has a huge problem with it. And when I was trying to look up about Roddy Piper and a lot of this race baiting antics, one of the big problems about it was that every single thing on Google was just come out that Hogan has been racist from that sex tape that was leaked. Let's look back at all the racist shit in wrestling, and Piper's there front and centre going, well, look, there he is. He did all this fucking racist shit. Wrestling has a racism problem from the 80s. And it did. It massively did.
Yeah.
Like many things that are unpalatable, WWE is simply elected to retell that story.
Yeah.
And I know I've spent a good deal of my podcasting career looking at the hypocrisy of the Attitude Era, them kind of going, well, it wasn't really about all this horrible shit we did. It was about this wacky fun stuff. Pretty much the same in the 80s. One of the reasons why Piper was so shocking to me was I always knew who Piper was. I got this documentary back 2006, whenever it was, and I put in that DVD, and me and my brother were like, holy shit! Roddy Piper, what the fuck was he doing? Whoa! And we were our minds were fucking blown that, born to controversy, it didn't mean that he was pulling on the tights and poking people in the eyes. It meant that he was saying fucking whoa, crazy, racist shit at times. It was really, really shocking. Piper made a huge name for himself in Portlandia, the Portland territory. Don Owens was a wrestling promoter who really, really gave him a massive break and allowed Piper to kind of to shine and like position him as being a top star. And one of the main reasons why Piper became, not just a regional but like a national star was because of this guy Don Owen. And it's always been said that Piper viewed Don Owen as being almost like a father figure and really kind of helped ground him and helped realize his potential. And Piper was super, super loyal to people who were good to him. Like when Piper later signed with WWF, he refused to wrestle in Portland because he didn't want to compete against Don Owen and that territory.
That's quite sweet.
It is. Like, not many guys would do that.
No.
You know?
I wouldn't expect anyone to do that.
No.
Really. It's a business.
So Piper then went into the Mid-Atlantic territory in the NWA, and he became a big nasty heel on TV, and people were fucking incensed by this guy. Now, what was it that made people hate Piper so much in NWA Mid-Atlantic? He wore a dress. People were obsessed with the kills.
I don't understand this at all. It's like, is it like a time thing? Is it the fact that it was the 80s, or is it the fact that it's America, or is it both? But the idea there that a kilt is a skirt, and therefore the worst possible thing.
People were incensed, like particularly down south where a lot of NWA ran. Because here comes this guy with this big fucking mouth on him, and he's wearing a dress. Can you believe it? Like, you
have to take a few steps back now as a modern wrestling fan to be like, well, first of all, a kilt isn't a skirt.
No, it's a kilt.
Second of all, a skirt is not the worst thing in the world.
No.
Like, what the fuck?
Piper, it was all okay when you were, race bait and all that, but once you put on that kilt, you crossed the line, my friend.
Yeah, seriously, priorities.
And like the announcers were like, oh, look at this guy wearing this, this skirt or whatever. Like later on, it would become like a thing of him as a face, like him, like kind of, I wear this because I've got the balls to wear, kind of, and it's a sign of a real man. I can wear whatever I want. That was cool. But back in the 80s, like Piper and Flair, when they would feud, Flair would just be incensed that this man in a dress was coming out. Like, how dare he?
But like, seriously, did they not know what kilts are?
I don't think they did.
So, okay, genuine question. I do not mean any offence here. Do Americans still not really understand what kilts are?
I think they do now.
Okay.
And honestly,
so it was like an 80s thing. People just didn't know.
Yeah, 70s and 80s, the exposure. I mean, they thought that Roddy Piper's voice was what, Scottish people sounded like. And I have met people at WrestleMania and stuff like that, American fans who like genuinely associate like a lot of Scotland thinking that's Roddy Piper. That's kind of what it is. Like,
wow.
Like I remember a mate of mine was in WWF New York, and a fan, one of the fans who walks around with a belt on his shoulder. He's like, "Where are you guys from?" He's like, "Oh, we're from Ireland." "Oh, Ireland, like Scotland, like Roddy Piper."
Wow.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious as well as to what Scottish wrestlers think about Roddy Piper. Because there's loads of Scottish wrestlers now.
There are, yes.
Loads of great ones.
All I'll say is that what I saw, it's just like such not a good answer. But like in terms of identifying as being Scottish and whatnot, he basically cut a promo and I saw him do his one-man show. And he was like, look, I never had a home. Like, never had a home. I never had a place where I identified with being from home. I left home when I was a kid. And I went around all these different places. And the one place where I felt like welcomed and people reciprocated the love was Scotland. And I wore this kilt and I played those bagpipes to represent the Scottish people. So and he said it in a way where there was tears in his eyes and his voice did that thing where it wavers because you can know he's being serious with you people. Right now, here are the and I was like, oh, Piper, I just, oh my God, you're Scottish. So, I mean, I do believe he's got genuine love for Scotland.
I don't think you'd make all the effort to learn the bagpipes and wear a kilt in America, in the Deep South, in the 80s, if you didn't have a genuine love. But my opinion, my question isn't about what his opinion was on Scotland. I'm sure he does love them greatly. I want to know what Scotland thought of him. Well,
I mean, I would imagine that not being Scottish, I can't really answer that question. So if you're Scottish, please tweet in using the hashtag #HowToPiper. Let us know what are your thoughts on, being a Scottish person. Does Piper make you filled with pride? Or is it a bit like, oh, Jesus, there's that lad out pretending to be Scottish? But like, I've met people who feel both ways. I mean, I've met people who are like, oh, fuck yeah, Roddy Piper, he, embodies Scottish qualities. And I know people who are like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah, because it is in a way almost a caricature, but also he's got elements of it that are very much our core parts of Scottish
Yeah.
culture. It's an interesting one.
It's weird and really strange. And the first match we watched with Roddy Piper, we watched a bit of detail. One of a match that was requested en masse, which was Rowdy Roddy Piper taking on Greg the Hammer Valentine from Starrcade 1983 in a dog collar match. Now, this was a first for a number of reasons. This is the first ever pay-per-view that we were watching this from. So there was never...
What?
Yeah, it's the first ever pay-per-view.
Oh, wow.
Incredible, right? It was the first... It was shown on closed circuit, which meant that you paid a ticket, you went to watch this in like a cinema or a theatre or whatever like that.
Oh my God.
So they actually tried to preempt WrestleMania by doing the show a few months beforehand.
Wow.
And a dog collar match. Now, for me, who's watched a trillion billion of these types of matches, I was like, yep, dog collar match, here we go. And as soon as they said these two would be joined up with a dog collar, your fucking eyes popped out of your head. You're like, what?
It just seems ridiculous.
How so?
Because, first of all, they're wearing dog collars.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty silly. Then they're tied up by a chain.
To the neck as well. That's what makes it scary.
Yeah, it's a very vulnerable area.
There's been a lot of chain matches and collar matches, but oftentimes it's the wrist. Very
Yes.
rarely will they go around the neck.
I'm surprised they don't do it for the ankle more often. Because you think that would be...
Jesus, that would be scary. Trying to run and stuff against the ropes.
The neck is scary. Scary place. And also, Roddy Piper made the dog collar and the chain.
Yeah.
Like, he went out and bought the leather and all the supplies and the fucking dog studs that he put in the collar himself, and then got it all made at a shoe place. It's all so DIY.
It is, isn't it? There's kind of like a punk rock quality to a lot of the wrestling at the time. It's like, you and I are going to have a great match. Let's go down to the shoemakers and get some leather and some studs and some chain, like.
What was really shocking to me was the idea that, like, violent gimmick matches like this existed in the early 80s. I thought they didn't exist until, like, the late 90s.
And what was it like about that? Like, why did you not assume this kind of stuff was happening back in the early 80s? Because this is 83. This is pre-Hulkamania, like.
I think it's because when we were watching matches for Hulk Hogan, Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, the crowds there all seem older. They wear kind of pale colours. The matches as well were slow, kind of...
Pantomime,
never go over the top rope, hardly any blood, although obviously there was occasionally. It just seemed a lot more soft core.
Yeah.
Whereas this reminded me of ECW. Like, the crowd were really into it. They were getting angry.
Yeah.
I mean, before the match even started, there was blood covering the ring.
Yeah, I know, because this is like
grimy.
I was telling you, this is a bloody match, Joe. Like, the match starts and before there's already blood smeared and it's dried on dirty fucking canvas. Like,
Really gross.
It's really interesting because a lot of the narrative is kind of, wrestling was soft in the 80s. Then the 90s, ECW kind of made it hardcore. Then WWE nicked that, and then wrestling itself became a lot more violent. And then, it tamed down again in more recent years. But oh boy, you go back into the 70s, the 80s, geez, even the 60s in some of these places, some of the territories down south, particularly places like Puerto Rico, they fucking beat the shit out of each other. I mean, talking real bloody, real gory. You're talking about guys stabbing each other with instruments, forks, shivs, all this kind of horrible, gross stuff. And
That's horrible.
it's so funny as well because there was a real disconnect between the NWA fans and the WWF fans, because if you were a wrestling fan back then, there was stuff like this going on, and not every match was a bloody massacre like this, but there was hard-hitting, drag-out brawls like, come on, kill him, and then there was the kind of cartoony stuff, and there was a real fine line, a real big line was drawn down between the two companies, because one is being cartoony in Saturday morning kids show, and the other one is being like lads, blood, sweat, tears, leaving it all the ring, beating the shit out of each other. And I honestly think this is one of the most disturbing matches to watch.
I was wondering, do people ever these days, or did they during like the Attitude Era kind of times, ever go like, oh, wrestling's so violent now. Remember the good old days when wrestling was like all nice and soft and there wasn't needless violence
no, they
and
did.
blood and weapons.
There's actually a pay-per-view that me and Adam reviewed for the Attitude Era podcast, which came out in 1999, called Heroes of Wrestling, and the idea was they get a load of guys from this time period, like Greg Valentine, he was on the show, and they're like, we'll put on the old time wrestling, the wrestling that you guys used to love. And there was, a lot of the soft style and the old matches and the gimmicks, but there was one match on it which was like, here's the 1980s bloodbath, and they were allowed to stab each other with fucking forks.
What the
bleeding
hell?
everywhere, like, and that's a part of 80s wrestling, and you can't get around to, like, yeah. Is that as shocking for you, I guess, is it?
Yeah, that's really shocking.
Yeah, wrestling.
I just assumed that, like, when we saw all those kinds of matches from, like, Mr. Perfect and stuff with the nice little older audience, with their soft pastel colours and their clean wrestling, I just assumed that was the time.
God, yeah, I can't wait to watch some, like, Ric Flair, Terry Funk with you from the 80s and shit and see some of the real hardcore wars these guys got into.
So are we going to do an episode on NWA then?
I think we'll do an episode, a lot of wrestlers featured from around this time. You'll probably get to see more of this, a lot of the NWA mainstays like Flair and Harley Race and Terry Funk, and you'll get to see there was a lot more of this going on, because this match, this was hardcore. These guys were wrapping the chain around their faces, into the eyes, into the nose.
It's horrible.
I've got some great quotes here from Joe from watching this match. No, don't do that. Don't punch him with that horrid chain fist.
It was horrid.
It
He
was.
wrapped the chain around his fist, and I just knew what was coming. Of course, he's going to use it as like a... What are those things called?
Brass knucks,
yeah,
kind of,
like that,
yeah.
but more horrid.
And what I love most about it as well is like how nonchalant Gordon Soley, the ring announcer, is like, and now Rowdy Roddy Piper, bleeding profusely from the ear. He's lost most of his hearing, blood all down his front, and now he's gouging out Greg Valentine's eyes with that chain. He's now going to try and put the chain in his mouth and rip it out his asshole. He's eviscerating him here, and he gets the win. It's like, they're so chill about it.
They are so chill. It's chilling how chill they are.
Piper's selling here. I mean, one could argue how much this is selling, how much is it a man being beaten half to death with a fucking chain, but
I mean, I know I'm just making noises right now, but fucking hell.
ASMR podcast.
It was pouring from his ear, and before the match even started, they were like, he's had a previous injury to his ear, his balance is all off, he probably can't even hear out of it right now. And then Greg Valentine just goes for the ear, keeps punching him with his chain fist, blood everywhere.
Forearms non-stop. You know, it's the only move Greg Valentine does in this match. He does forearms and he does elbows, and literally that's it. He does no other wrestling move in this whole match.
Wow.
And yet, it is a bloodbath, this thing. I think it's one of the most
Seriously.
captivating fucking stories in a wrestling match. It's just this guy Piper won't stay down, and he's like spasming, and you know, there's a lot of cocaine running through those veins, superhuman strength, like.
At one point, Roddy has Greg in like a hold,
Yeah.
and his head is resting on his chest, and the blood is just falling onto Greg's like arms and side, and it's just all coming from Roddy's ear. And I have a weakness, I think, for like ear injuries and eye injuries are particularly like disgusting to me.
Now, Piper's always maintained that he irreparably damaged his ear in this match. He like split his eardrum.
I'm not fucking surprised.
And you know the real thing about it though is that like some people like think that Piper like exaggerated that and maintained that for kayfabe.
Oh,
and
he
to
just
put Valentine
faked all
over.
that ear injury, that blood. He just poured some ketchup in
But
there.
he claimed that he never heard right out of his ear ever since as a result of this match. And he said this was the hardest match that he'd ever been involved with in any way, shape or form.
I'm really not surprised at all, because their ears are sensitive, fragile things. They are not as sturdy and as hardy as we may think.
And I love the way this match just end with like a big like spot. It's literally just Piper yanks him off the top rope with the chain, batters him with it, and just kind of rolls him around with a chain ball and just wins, and then Greg kills him again afterwards.
It was horrible, because like the bell finally rung. I was like, yes, this match is over. And then no, it just keeps going.
You know how he was called Greg the Hammer Valentine? This is probably going to make this worse for you now.
Jesus.
Like Flair wrote in his book about like how he got that name because he would literally just his forearm was legendary. He would just beat you with that forearm, like make a big smack. That was his. He would hammer you. That was Greg Valentine's gimmick.
And covered in chains, I imagine it's even worse.
Covered in blood. Horrible match, I think, though, in terms of like just leaving it all in the ring and just seeing like an absolute emotional war. Fucking hell, this was exasperating to watch. I loved it though. This is one of my fave Piper matches. What did you think?
I did not like it.
Are you squeamish from the blood?
I'm squeamish about all of it. The collars around the neck makes me very uncomfortable because I know how fucking easy it is to injure yourself there, and the damage that you can do to your neck can be like serious. Like, come on. Listen to How To Steve Austin and hear about some of the shit that happens with neck injuries. That makes me uncomfortable. The bleeding from the ear, and then not the fact that they didn't even check on him. The refs don't like come in like, are you all right there, Roddy? None of that. Like modern wrestling. No. It's just like, yeah, let's just keep pounding him in the ear with a chain.
What's really scary about this match as well is you can see how heavy the chain is. Yeah. Like when they're doing the tug of war at the start and the chain keeps falling down. It's not a gimmicked fake wrestling chain. That's a proper fucking hardcore chain. It's an absolute war. Did you give it a rating?
I did. I gave it 2 stars out of 5.
That's because you were hiding behind your eyes so much you couldn't see most of the match.
Yeah. I mean, I say it's a horrid match, but probably is quite important watching. If you were like me as a new fan and you kind of assumed that all wrestling before the 90s was like nice, soft, quaint moves.
I think a lot of people as well, because Piper is so heavily associated with being a talker, and also his wrestling style was kind of, like random boxing jabs and a bit kind of wacky and cartoony. I think a lot of people wrongly assume that Piper wasn't in these kind of wars, or Piper didn't have these knockout, drag-out brawls. Because he fucking did. Yeah, he did. He really, really did.
And his selling in this was really good. Like, I'm sure a lot of it probably was just legit.
It's easy to sell when you're dying.
But like the whole being out of balance thing and constantly falling over.
Yeah, because of his ear. Yeah.
Yeah, that was all really, really good.
He got hoovered up during the WWF expansion. Like we talked all the way back in our first episode of How to Wrestling with Vince McMahon buying up all the various territories and, taking their top stars so he could have his showcase of the best of the best. And he got Hogan, and he got a couple of guys who he were planning to be his main good guys. But Piper was hoovered up, not initially brought in to be the top bad guy. The top bad guy who was brought in was actually meant to be this guy called Dr. Death, David Schultz. Piper, because he was smaller, typical fucking McMahon, like, he was smaller, so he thought he could be Dave Schultz's mouthpiece, because he could talk.
Right.
And we'd have him be a manager, we'd have him say all this shit. But pretty much early on, they gave him this segment called Piper's Pit, where he could just say what he wanted to, mouth off. And Piper got over so much as a heel that before long, he was the top heel in the country. Piper's Pit is a weird one to kind of, it's something which for its time was really, really like groundbreaking. The idea of giving a wrestler their own little talk segment where this is my show, you come on, I interview you. Like, that's done to death now. You've got the highlight reel, you've had the cutting edge with Edge, the peep show with Christian. Everyone has like their own little segment where they can bring people on. But Piper was the first to actually do this. So a wrestler who had his own little, he could sit down and got a backdrop and everything. And we watched a whole bunch of Piper's Pits, including my favourite Piper's Pit with a young journeyman wrestler, Frankie Williams. Where are you from, Frankie? I'm from Columbus, Ohio. And he's getting a big fucking fight. He beats the shit out of him. Like, I asked Piper about Frankie Williams when I met him.
Yeah.
I was like, did Frankie know what you were going to do? And he goes, no, Frankie was just told to kind of, expect things to go south, but he didn't know what was going to happen.
Wow.
So you got Frankie Williams who literally tries to set up for himself going, let me tell you something, even though I don't win a lot of matches, I leave it all in the ring every day. And Piper just beats the shit out of him. And then Frankie tries to come back on and he beats him up again. And we get some great quotes from Piper. This is where his real majesty comes in, his real strength. He was a wordsmith. And a lot of the wrestlers these days, majority of them either get like big talking points or their whole promo scripted out from. Piper, 100% him, off the cuff, or stuff he'd written down.
That's so incredible to me, because he says about the Frankie Williams bit, he says that he came out, he didn't know who he was. He had literally no idea who this guy was that he was supposed to be cutting this, did you call it a promo?
Segment even, a whole segment, yeah.
And he asked him where he's from, and he says Columbus, Ohio. And Piper immediately is like, oh, thank God, I can have an angle here.
But like, all on the fly to think like that. And
yeah.
The gold comes up with, just when they think they've got the answers, I change the questions. Or like the one where he basically starts a fight with Andre the Giant. I love when Andre picks him up even though he's sitting down. And Piper's like, full of cocaine and piss and vinegar. He says, you do not throw rocks at a man with a machine gun. Oh, God.
He's so quotable.
Really quotable.
He should be paid. Oh, I just remembered that he is dead now. That's sad. But I was going to say that he would have made a really great job coming up with like Hollywood one-liners for action movies.
I don't know if it's just that it worked for Piper, but Piper never was like writing promos for people. It was always his own process, his own stuff that he came up with, and he was really, really good at like coming up with these just insanely quotable stuff.
Yeah.
Like you'd hope to have one line like that in your career. Not like you come up with one every now and then, like every week you'd come up with something fucking awesome. The real incident that everyone remembers from Piper's Pit, the most famous incident, and one was be interesting to talk about, where Jimmy Snuka got his face smashed open with a coconut.
Yep.
Bit of a weird one here, because it's a very famous, beloved incident where Piper, brings on Snuka onto Piper's Pit, and the whole angle is that previously Snuka was brought on and he wasn't allowed to talk, so Snuka's brought back on and Piper's incensed that he's complained, so he's like, oh, I'm going to make you feel at home. So he gets out loads of fruit and pineapples and bananas and coconuts to make him feel like he's home in the Fiji Isles. Another race baiting promo from old Hot Rod. And he starts the confrontation. He gets this coconut and he smashes it into Jimmy Snuka's face. And to quote Roddy Piper, I thought I killed him. How do you smash a coconut? Yeah. The force required.
I've tried to open coconuts in the past and I've been unsuccessful even with the use of like hammers and
like actual tools.
And he just lobs it at his head and it just disintegrates.
And like what I love most about it is that he hits him so hard you can tell straight away that like Snuka is like his lights are out because he just falls into the set. And for years I remember you see the clip of him hitting with the coconut. It's like, I remember Roddy hit Snuka with a coconut, lol. But you don't see the bit after, which is Roddy smashes him with a coconut, Snuka falls into the set, it all falls down, and Piper just tries to kill him. He keeps beating him up, throws him into the door, Snuka comes up covered in blood going, ah, runs after Piper, Piper closes the door behind him, he smashes into the door. And the people are fucking gonna cause a riot. These two sold out Madison Square Garden all around the country. They sold out venues on the basis of this feud. Piper was the hottest heel, nuclear heat at this time. People wanted this man to be killed. Coming out here, wearing a skirt, smashing a coconut over beloved alleged murderer Jimmy Superfly Snuka's face. How dare the man do such a thing? It was a weird angle looking back at it.
Yeah, it's seriously weird. But
fucked up.
But not the weirdest.
No, not the weirdest. I think the next one you're probably going to mention is the weirdest. There's not much context one can provide to make this one make a lot of sense, but it's Roddy Piper and Cowboy Bob Orton shaving a little person, shaving their hair off and making it into a mohawk.
Is that what they're doing? Because they only showed very short clips and it just looked like varying levels of hate crimes.
Yeah, it looked like kind of two hate rolled into one.
Someone with dwarfism. A black man.
The idea was they were shaving his head because this is when he started his feud with Mr. T. They shaved this guy's head into a mohawk, kind of trying to psych out Mr. T. But as far as I know, that guy ended up being in Mr. T's corner when he vanquished the old heel Roddy Piper later on, which is meant to make it okay, I guess.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, it's fine to do hate crimes, so long as later on the victim of said hate crime gets to stand in the corner of the person that never fully gets revenge on the harasser in the first instance. That's fine.
The 1980s, ladies and gentlemen. A different time.
That was one of the most shocking things I thought about the whole of Roddy Piper's career.
And the fact as well that he just do it so nonchalantly.
Seriously, and they cut back to it all. So at the time of this documentary, they obviously thought that instance was not shocking
2006 is okay to
mention.
It's
still okay to shave black people with dwarfism in to entertain people.
And Cowboy Bob Orton's wow, that was something when we did that. Jesus.
Are you serious? This is horrible.
Why didn't you interview the guy they fucking shaved?
Seriously.
How did you fucking feel about that, mate? So all this shit that was going on was basically getting Piper across to because this is all on national TV as well. Unlike before where Piper was doing this stuff, it was kind of, in regional promotions, small arenas, local TV. You're now on national TV. Worldwide audiences seeing Piper doing all this shit. So Piper essentially becomes the world's biggest villain. And he was hated so much around this time. Like, so much. Like, you can pretty much ask anyone from the 1980s who grew up anywhere in America. I'm pretty sure they knew about Piper in the 80s, even if they weren't wrestling fans, because Piper, around this time, transcended into the mainstream. And a lot of what wrestling was doing at the time with Vince McMahon and how it became so popular was that they got into the mainstream. Rockin' wrestling was something we mentioned briefly before with Hulk Hogan, where they managed to cross over with MTV and Cyndi Lauper. Now the whole thing came about because Roddy Piper and a few wrestlers, through a guy called Captain Lou Albano, got into Cyndi Lauper's music video for The Goonies Are Good Enough. And that led then to her being involved in a wrestling angle. They were presenting Cyndi Lauper with a gold record for The Goonies Are Good Enough, reaching so many record sales. In Madison Square Garden, here's Lou Albano giving Cyndi Lauper the big award, and that's not lovely. And out comes Rowdy Roddy Piper, who breaks the gold disc over Lou Albano's head and kicks Cyndi Lauper.
Yep.
In front, and this is like, people are tuning this in, like Cyndi Lauper fans, people who are probably like, yay, I love Cyndi Lauper and this wrestling thing looks good. Who's this evil Scottish monster coming in? He's kicked Cyndi Lauper and smashed the record. What the fuck? Like, they were like, when they got their chance to do a little bit of mainstream, they didn't kind of go, well, let's present them with like a little bit toned down. No, they went fucking full on. You got full on hot rods. And the mainstream got exposed to Roddy Piper, and Roddy Piper was brought out to them as being history's greatest monster.
He says, if a woman hits me, I hit her back. He
said like so many. If you go back and you watch all these segments, all these Piper pits,
like, I find it's funny that, like, watching all this, that was like the least offensive thing about anything in his career. I was like, oh, of course, if a woman hits him, he hits her back. That's not even offensive at this point.
I tried to look up and find out about what his thoughts were, looking back with the benefit of hindsight and see, what he thought of a lot of this stuff. And it's hard. It's like impossible, because when he's brought up any of this stuff, he kind of goes off in tangents and talks about other things. But I did find a quote from around the 80s, from him talking about his stuff he did in the 80s, where he said that he regretted that he did some of the stuff that they were doing, and he was going they were going really hard with it at the moment, and he felt that doing a lot of racist stuff or race-based stuff was lazy, and he hates racist people and he hates racism. But I don't know if that excuses it or even addresses the issue at hand. And I guess, it makes it 10 times worse when you've got, like, you're looking back with the benefit of hindsight in a much more socially conscious time where we are now, looking back at a time when that, we're talking about, over 30 years ago now. It was a different time back then, and some people will argue that looking back at those times with modern sensibilities, you're always going to end up being offended because times were different back then. So what was quite mad was that this all built up to a big confrontation between Hogan and Piper, which is called the War to Settle the Score. Now, Piper never won the WWF Championship in his entire career, which is something which every single person is like, Piper didn't need the title. Piper never needed to be champion. It doesn't matter that Piper was never champion. Then he cut to Piper, I really wish I was world champion. Like, he wanted to be champion, he just never was. Like, Piper and Hogan had a bit of a fucked up history. Like, they didn't like each other for the most part. Hogan in this documentary, if you know, took a lot of times to step to one side and go, by the way, he wasn't that important.
Seriously, Hogan goes to extra effort to be like, oh yeah, he didn't really influence modern wrestling. Not like I did.
Yeah, and he's kind of basically implying that, the first WrestleMania, which is always building towards...
It's all thanks to Hulk Hogan.
And it's not like, because who gets involved in this, and this is really fucking weird, is Mr. T runs out in the War to Settle the Score, which blew your mind at the time. You were jumping up and down and go, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Did you know that Mr. T was involved in wrestling?
Right, but I only know this because I've been listening back to older episodes of How to Wrestling, but you did actually mention this in Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
That there was a feud involving Mr. T.
Ah, I see.
But when I was watching this, my mind was absolutely blown. I was like, how the hell was there any kind of celebrity involvement? Because again, I think I told myself that this celebrity involvement didn't exist in wrestling until like the 90s.
No, this was Vince McMahon's vision of wrestling involved celebrities. Yeah. And it's funny, I think for Hogan to sit there and kind of go, well, it wouldn't have been possible with anyone other than me, kind of, Piper wasn't important, or for Piper to say, if it wasn't for me, this whole thing wouldn't have worked altogether. Honestly, the only person that whole WrestleMania 1 main event who can really lay claim to that is Mr. T.
Or Vince McMahon.
Or Vince McMahon, yeah, those are the two who really made it possible.
Yeah.
Because
Vince McMahon mortgaged his home to afford this, right?
Yeah, and there was like a big, there was a big idea that if WrestleMania wasn't a success, then, that was it, no more WWF. They had put everything on the line for it. The first WrestleMania was really, really massive for that reason and for a number of reasons. But really what got people in that arena, and I really believe this, was, yes, it was Mr. T, but these guys were all phony wrestlers. And that phony wrestler, Roddy Piper, who was fucking running his mouth and saying all this shit about, Mr. T and being racist and all this stuff, he's only a phony wrestler. And he's wearing a skirt, no less. Mr. T, however, he's a real-life tough guy. He starred the A-Team, Rocky 3. He's a total badass. So people were buying this. Seriously.
I don't understand how that works, though.
Because people had a bit of
he's an actor, therefore he must be...
proper tough guy. Because T was known as being a real-life tough guy because he was originally a bouncer and a bodyguard and all this stuff. A lot of fans had this bad thing in their mouth from, wrestling, thinking it was real in the 50s and 60s, and it turns out it's actually all a bit of a show. And Vince had said, it's sports entertainment at this point.
Wow, that's early.
Yeah, so people were wanting to see this real tough man, proper tough guy, Mr. T, beat up the fake wrestler Roddy Piper. And I think that's really what did it. So I think you could actually remove Hogan from that equation and put in Jimmy Snuka even, and it still would have worked.
Wow.
People wanted to see Piper get the shit knocked out of him, and for all the weirdness of looking back at the stuff he's did, there's no doubt in my mind that Piper incensed people into watching WrestleMania 1, and he was a huge, huge part of that. He was not just a player, as Hogan said. This led to these two eventually having a boxing match at WrestleMania 2, which I elected to not show Joe because I like to show Joe wrestling matches and not two men who can't move their fists get increasingly frustrated with each other.
So why couldn't they do a proper wrestling match then?
This is so fucked up. It's Piper really felt strongly about protecting the wrestling business, as we've discussed for various reasons. And one of the main things Piper was against was the idea of an outsider like Mr. T coming in and making them look bad and then going away.
Right.
Because then what loses all their credibility? Wrestling, loses credibility as a whole. The original plan for WrestleMania 1 was for Piper to get pinned by Mr. T. And Piper was like, no fucking way. No way at all. And he wouldn't take proper moves from Mr. T. The idea was Mr. T would beat the shit out of everyone, clear house. And in that match, Mr. T did very little of anything. He got beaten up for most of the match. The reason being, Piper argued that if Mr. T comes in and beats up all of us, and then he goes back off and he makes, season 9 of the A-Team or whatever, and then left with Hulk Hogan and the guys who got beaten up by the not even a wrestler who just came in, and we all look like jabronis. So Piper was adamant. He refused to lose to Mr. T. He refused to make Mr. T look good in any way, shape, or form. This goes on to a fucking boxing match then, and Piper was like, we got to try and make it look like a shoot. And to do that to do a fake boxing match, that's literally nearly impossible. It's to move that quickly, move those heavy gloves.
Yeah.
No way. And Piper was training to be a boxer. Mr. T was not really training at the time. And Piper refused to make Mr. T look good. He had one punch and he missed Piper hitting it. Piper fucked a stool at him at one point and then just gave him a body slam, and that was it. It was awful. But that actually started people warming towards Piper because Mr. T had lost a bit of his shine at the time. People were sick of him being everywhere. He was on every TV show. You know the way people fall out of favour with Hollywood stars. So this kind of started Piper becoming a little bit loved by the fans, because you be a good enough bad guy for long enough, you eventually become a good guy in wrestling.
Yeah.
So Piper it was always viewed that he didn't get on with Mr. T because he refused to do anything to make Mr. T look in any way remotely competent. But I can see his point.
Yeah, I don't think he's wrong.
But it's kind of funny to think that this was a time in wrestling where it's like, no, what you're proposing is bad, so let's go out and do something shit instead.
Yeah, I think kind of the modern way of handling those situations works better, which is having celebrities kind of involved but not the main part of any match.
Yeah, I think he was right to do that, because I think if you just have a good, as an outsider coming in like that, it will make people look stupid. But when it comes to the point where you're actually destroying the quality of the show, just don't have Mr. T versus Roddy Piper then.
No, you could have just had Mr. T in the corner with someone else against Roddy Piper.
Yeah.
And had the two actual wrestlers face off.
Do a wrestling match as opposed to like, oh gee. And like the whole thing was such a calamity because he said that they taped his hands in the boxing gloves, so when he was falling out of the ring he couldn't grab on even. So it was really dangerous. Even the little basic stuff that they were doing was really, really hard. So it was a complete fiasco. So essentially what Piper did this time, and it was really smart, many people have done it since, and people don't really point to Piper as being the originator, but he retired. 1987, Piper's like, yep, I'm retiring, I'm off,
And
see you
how
later.
old was he at this point?
Would have been mid-30s or thereabouts.
Okay.
So Piper said he was retiring, and I don't think anyone believed him at the time, but Piper went off basically because he had offers to do movies. WrestleMania 3, John Carpenter, around that time, approached him, said he wanted him to be in a movie called They Live, which happens to be my fucking favourite movie of all time from John Carpenter. One of my all-time favourite sci-fis. It's like everything that is right about 80s cinema. We watched They Live. I mean, what are your thoughts on They Live, Joe?
Oh, it's fucking awesome. It's really, really cool. It's a great movie.
He was quoted as saying, Roddy Piper, like a few years later, that it was a documentary, like, because about how modern world kind of is kind of mimicking the weirdness of They Live.
I love how relevant They Live is today, even more so than when it came out.
I think, yeah, it's actually, if anything, it's more relevant now than it would have been back in the 80s. But the famous scene from that, which is the amazing fight scene where Keith David and Rowdy Roddy Piper kick the veritable shit out of each other for around 7 or 8 minutes. They rehearsed that for like something like 5 months.
Jesus.
And this is what I love most about it. You know where they rehearsed it? In John Carpenter's back garden.
What?
Yeah, they rehearsed the whole thing. The Keith David, John Carpenter, and Roddy Piper, they rehearsed the whole thing. And they wanted to make it look like a proper fight. And that's like one of the greatest fight scenes ever because it's not like glitzy and glamorous. It's like Piper.
Backyard wrestling.
Yeah, it's like Piper and Valentine. It's two lads beating the shit out of each other.
This is John Carpenter's like dream, isn't it? Because he was a wrestling fan.
He was,
like,
yeah.
How can I get my own Roddy Piper personal wrestling match in my own backyard? I know. I'll create a Hollywood blockbuster.
Basically, They Live is just like a weekend party that got out of hand at the Carpenters, basically. There was a lot of good wine going around. Guys got a little bit antsy, a little bit of cocaine. Before you know it, Keith David's getting back suplexed and a pair of sunglasses forcefully put on his face.
What I found most shocking about this film, though, was I didn't realise that the phrase, I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum and I'm all out of bubblegum, because I've heard that throughout my life.
So you heard that before we did any Piper
Doesn't
stuff?
Duke Nukem say it?
He does, yeah.
Yeah, I always assumed it was from Duke Nukem or something like that. I had no idea that it was from Roddy Piper himself in They Live. Like, that was his idea.
And the best thing about it is that, like, the story for ages was that, he just came up with it on the fly. But I think the real story was that Piper gave John Carpenter his notebook, which is full of his old promo ideas.
Yeah, it was all full of wrestling promos.
Could you imagine what it would be like to read through that?
Gold. The gold.
And I think that was one of the lines that end up going in there. I think it's fucking brilliant. Like, so They Live was like Piper's first big movie, and honestly, his only real proper big movie. He's been a lot of B-movie trash since then, He's been in a lot of straight-to-DVD gold.
He's been in, like, big stuff as well, though, because, like, he was in It's Always Sunny.
He was in It's Always Sunny, that's true. He was the maniac, foraging for chestnuts.
Yeah.
A little bit too real, that character. He was like, I'm going to go grease myself up. But he was also in Hell Comes to Frogtown and a lot of like kind of B-movie stuff. And like Piper was the first one to say that, look, a lot of the time he was doing it for paychecks and because he was good at it and because he had a name, not necessarily because he thought it was the work of art. He was quite disparaging of a lot of his movie stuff when I saw him, but he said They Live was like, he thought it was one of the most important things that he did and he was most proud of. I think it's just fucking brilliant. If you've not seen They Live...
Oh, watch it.
Guys, seriously, it is like
watch it.
top of your list. And yeah, I think match of the night would definitely have to go to Roddy Piper versus Keith David in that backlot. Like,
It's anti-capitalism. It's got skeletons. It's got conspiracy theories and Roddy Piper wearing sunglasses and having a wrestling match. What's not to love?
And who are you, my little fella? Mama don't like tattletales. I fucking love Roddy Piper in this movie. It's fucking a kick-ass movie, and it even gets more and more relevant with each passing day, I think.
So at this point, when They Live sort of came out, had any other wrestlers at that point left to become actors?
Well, Hulk Hogan went off to make No Holds Barred in 1984, where Hogan insisted on making a movie and made Vince McMahon pay for it, and said that if it lost any money, he'd pay him back every single cent, and he never did because it lost loads of money.
Wow.
Essentially, the McMahons have always had a troubled relationship with wrestlers going off to do movies. Hogan's promoter way back in the day hated Hogan going off to do Rocky 3, thought it would expose the business and it was bad. And the reality was it made Hogan a massive superstar. Vince knew that Piper was getting on in years and was maybe not as important in 87 as he was in 83 or 84. But even still, he didn't want him going off and getting his independence, essentially. And Piper always resented a lot of promoters for that, which is if, there's a whiff of you getting money or getting your own way or getting successful on your own, they try and pull you back in or put your roadblocks in your way. McMahon offered Piper the same amount of money to go and do a movie that he had found instead of They Live. And I think Piper was smart enough to realise, look, I can keep McMahon sweet, make the same money, do this shitty movie that will be forgotten and make me a punchline like Hogan in No Holds Barred, or I can go off with John Carpenter. Piper took the smart money and went and he did this and kind of was able to make a career out of it. I think the reality of it was that Piper knew that if he was there all the time, it wasn't going to mean a lot. But if he went and he took a break, as Jim Cornette famously said, we can't miss you if you don't go away. And Piper would go away sometimes for a few months, sometimes for a few years, and he would come back and it was like, oh, Piper's back! And it's not as if Piper was under a rock. He knew he was off making movies, being on TV shows, making his roads in Hollywood, and he would come back to wrestling, and that's what was most important, is that he would come back. Roddy Piper was the prototype part-timer, I guess.
Wow.
Like guys who do it now, like he's basically like Brock Lesnar, except that instead of sitting at home counting his big stacks of money and shooting fruit with his AK-47, he's off, working in Hollywood. One of the times he came back, though, it was for not such a great angle, and one which, we've had the big chat about Race and Piper, but here it is again. It's Bad News Brown and Roddy Piper painting himself half black, half white, as Jim Ross expertly tries to navigate these tricky racial waters. Was Roddy Piper saying that this issue is as clear as black and white? No, he fucking wasn't! He's half blackface! It's not good, ever. There's never a good time to do it.
Nope.
And the only thing I can say in defense of Roddy Piper is that there was full blackface done in wrestling by white wrestlers as recent as 2006.
No, are you serious?
Yep.
Fucking hell.
You know what?
What? I'm sorry, 2006?
2006.
Which is when this
documentary
came out where they're
not in this company, mind. Another company, though, that had national TV and had guys do it on national TV, though.
This documentary, to be fair to the documentaries makers, some bits they've kind of glossed over, but this one at least, they were like, this was bad. He should not have done it.
It's so fucked up reading up about this, because this is the one thing when Piper does get asked about the racism of the 80s, or if he gets challenged, it's always this bit here.
I think the reason that is because it makes no sense as an angle. He's
does,
a face. Yeah. He's not supposed
he's the good guy as well.
to be doing, you can't, there's no excusing it. There's literally no angle you can come from this and be like, yeah, well, blah, 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 blah. No.
I watch, for the things I do for wrestling, folks, I watch all of Roddy Piper's segments and interviews that lead up to this. And Piper's excuse for this always was, Bad News Brown was a lousy wrestler. And this was a feud for WrestleMania, which meant he had to do 30 interviews to build it up all along the way. And this was not like nowadays where if you and I are going to wrestle at WrestleMania, we'll probably have a couple of matches, we'll beat each other up beforehand. Back in those days, you and I will wrestle at WrestleMania and we will see each other at WrestleMania, you know. So Piper, his excuse was that I had to think outside the box because here I've got a lazy wrestler and I need to think of a way to make this angle hot and relevant. This is such not a good excuse. But anyway, he said at the time that he was inspired by Nelson Mandela because Nelson Mandela, who had just been released from prison because under apartheid he'd been kept in jail for many, many years in a white man's jail, and he said that every day the jailkeeper came in or the guard came in, Nelson Mandela stood up and he put his hand out to shake the guard's hand because he said, I don't see race, I don't see colour, you are my brother and I'm trying to do that. So Piper here, what he's saying was that I don't see race, I don't see colour, you're the one who's making this a racial issue. I know lots of, quote, beautiful black men out there. Piper quoting Nelson Mandela, and he says, I don't see color. He did reference Black Power at one point, saying that they were on his side. And Roddy, this is fucking awkward. Roddy, you're killing me now, okay? You're making this...
And especially considering he says that he himself considers racial angles to be lazy. And this is Roddy Piper. It's a man who is clearly intelligent. He clearly can pull a promo out of his arse on any subject that he wants. Hell, Frankie Williams, or whatever his name was, he managed to pull a huge angry promo out just based on the fact that guy had lost in his home state many times. You can do that, and you have to then rely on half blackface.
I think, and Piper as well, he was going the whole time, I don't see color, man.
We don't have to talk about those awkward issues, so we'll just say we don't see race instead. That's easier.
And the reality of this is that Roddy Piper claimed he didn't see colour in this. Bad News Brown did, and Bad News Brown was not comfortable with this angle. He thought it was racist.
Really? So he did talk
like
about it.
Yeah, he hated it. Now, Bad News, he was known for basically not getting on with most of the wrestlers and being kind of very unkept to himself and all that, and never has anything kind of good or positive to say about his time in wrestling.
I wonder if that might be because he was a black wrestler in a very racist industry.
But the reality of it is that Piper at half blackface, nope, absolutely not. And the fact as well that when he's doing it, he's doing a Michael Jackson dance as well.
Jesus.
What the fuck is that like, And the reason why I always I struggle with this is because I've seen so many interviews where they're like, you grew up watching you as a kid and you did this half blackface thing and this is really fucked up. Can you tell me about that? And he goes, Andre the Giant and Marty Skolin, they hide away the solution that I meant to use to get all the black off me. And I'm now in the shower. I'm in the sauna for 3 weeks trying to get it. Oh, Roddy, what a funny anecdote about not being able to get it off. I've forgotten about the fact that you were in half... yes, you've got some funny anecdotes about it, but that's the only time you'd ever really talk about it. And I think you can just be like, I grabbed the wrong end of the stick. This
Seriously,
was wrong.
Look, all he would have to do is be like, about my history, right? I am a troubled person with various mental illnesses and I have made big mistakes in my career, of which this is one of many.
I think Piper never reached that point.
And I realise as well, to get to that point actually takes a bit of support and encouragement and a community that is healthy and wholesome and would encourage that.
I didn't get that all times in the world of wrestling.
You probably didn't get that. Still doesn't excuse it though.
Yeah.
I will say though, I do think it is a rather apt punishment that he had to scrape off the black Sharpie ink or whatever it was until his skin tore and bled.
If ever anything's going to make you reflect on your decision to use
maybe
blackface,
that wasn't a good idea.
You take a long fucking hard think about that.
I only wish that it had been Bad News Brown who had gotten to do that.
Yeah, maybe it says something that Piper never did blackface again after that. Did he learn his lesson?
Probably the wrong lesson he learned there.
Probably, yeah. Coming up next, we watched one of my all-time favourite matches and one that was really, really heavily requested, mainly because Piper is not known for having mat classics, but this is viewed as being his best wrestling match, which is him defending his Intercontinental Championship, the only belt he ever held at that time, against Bret the Hitman Hart. I love this match from WrestleMania 8 because it's got good guy Roddy against good guy Bret Hart, and he gets introduced Rowdy Roddy Piper. Yow! I love the story of this match. It's a really simple story. You've got Roddy Piper, who's the veteran. He's got the belt. Bret Hart, he's won the belt before. He's the upcoming star. He wants it back. And they know each other very well. Piper's making out that they were grew up together essentially. And Piper's gonna, put up the biggest fight as he can to hold on to this belt. And throughout the match, you just see the story is that Piper's temper gets tested because Piper is still in his heart, you worry, that rule breaker, the guy who's going to do anything, the Rowdy Roddy Piper of old. And there's so many moments in this where it's Piper feels like the cracks are showing, Bret gets the better of him in an exchange, so he just goes and he spits on him, or Bret outsmarts him and he freaks out, gets really upset. I fucking love this match. What I didn't like though is when Roddy's coming out, that really creepy Rowdy Roddy Piper doll that's in the crowd. The really scary one. I posted it on our Instagram page. If you're not following us, How To Wrestling on the old Instagram, videos and pics out the wazoo. You get to see me slowly lose my mind with wrestling figures there. But that creepy Roddy Piper doll, I'm genuinely having nightmares about at the moment.
Oh shit, because I found it on eBay for 20 quid.
No!
And your birthday's next week.
No!
I just put it in the bed and you can come home one day, get into bed, it will be there.
No, it'll cut mean promos on us and come to life.
Yeah.
That thing chasing me with a pair of scissors is literally like, ah! No, I don't want that. I'm going to find a big pile of cocaine. The doll's going to burst out of it. Wah! No, absolutely not. Roddy is constantly tested in this match to be that nasty heel. Brett gets busted open hard at one point, starts bleeding out the wazoo.
Was he bleeding?
This is funny you asked that, because at this time this was PG WWF at the time. You weren't allowed to bleed. You could do blackface if it was half, but you couldn't you couldn't bleed,
Right.
Black boot polish, that's okay. Red blood, no, that's wrong. So you were forbidden from doing a blade job, but if you accidentally got busted open, it was okay. So what happened in this match was that Brett expertly made himself bleed, making it look like it was an accident by getting punched right above that eyebrow, a old hard way. You get punched there hard, the eyebrow will split, you get a big load of blood. It looks like it's an accident. So they got away with it. That's blood going out without a blade there. That's blood via human knuckles. Is what we've got there.
Piper's kicks are pretty weak, I've noticed.
Yeah, he's all about the punches, but when we get down to the kicks.
The kicks are weak. His punches, though, are scary. He hits Brett at one point in this match, and it's fucking just
clocks.
Terrifying. It must have been a shoot punch.
Piper was known for throwing potatoes left, right, and centre. And one of the reasons why that boxing stuff got over is that Andre the Giant was a friend of his. And when Piper first wrestled in WWF, he had a lot of trouble getting over because he was a smaller guy, but Andre sold for the boxing, which, Andre never sold for anyone. So everyone's like, oh shit, Piper's got golden gloves, fast hands. The reality is he lived in a YMCA for a few years as a kid, so he had some boxing training. But yeah, you catch a couple of them stray shots with those fast flurries. I would not like to be in the ring there. There's a very big chance that Piper just punched Brett for real in the face and gave him that cut.
He did, yeah.
Now, the bit that I loved, and harkens back to an innocent time, much more innocent time, when the fans were a lot more innocent, a lot more gullible, when Roddy Piper inadvertently bumps into the ref, and then he thinks, ooh, I might be able to cheat. Now, these days, if a heel does anything remotely heelish, the fans all chant yes and go, yay, do the bad thing. Piper raises up the bell over his head, and you can actually hear children crying.
Mm-hmm. You can hear screaming, crying.
No, Roddy!
Please, no! Oh my God, he's gonna kill Bret Hart!
Were you surprised by, the innocence of the fans at the time, or...?
No, because in the documentary, he says that he probably could have, killed him with that bell.
That's true.
They look heavy as
they
well.
Are. The bell is the hardest part of the ring, in case those of you keeping score at home,
And, we already know that Roddy Piper has a scary habit of attacking people at random and not knowing whether
he was going to kill Morton Downey Jr. with the fucking the fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
Roddy, no!
Jimmy Snuka with the coconut, I'm just saying, he's got a reputation.
Seriously, didn't go into business for himself. But he gets the sleeper hold locked into Brett, which Brett does. He runs up the ropes, goes back onto his shoulders, and manages to pin Roddy for the championship. Now, that's interesting for two reasons. Number one, Rowdy Roddy Piper's finishing maneuver, Joe, was the sleeper hold. Piper just usually put them in a regular sleeper hold, standing, and they would go to sleep. And he would
that
win.
Seems really strange.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Hogan always said he regretted making his finisher be the leg drop because he had to jump on his butt every night, and basically he had to give himself hip surgery, and claims he lost a few inches to height.
Is that the only reason Roddy Piper was wrestling as long as he did, is because his finisher is... Wow.
Fuck me, if I was into wrestling, I'd be going for the crossface chicken wing or the sleeper hold. Yeah, easy on the knees. Love it. Seriously, Roddy Piper could pop that sleeper in even when he was in his 50s. He could just go bam, sleeper, and people would pop for Piper doing the sleeper. No bump, doesn't have to go on his back, doesn't have to leave his feet. It's fucking perfect.
Wouldn't work for a lot of wrestlers.
Dolph Ziggler tried to get the sleeper over at one point.
Really?
He did successfully for around about a year. They put it over strong. But I love simple moves getting put over.
I think Dean Ambrose could pull it off.
The sleeper hold. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Piper getting pinned here was actually the first time he got pinned on camera in his entire WWF run. And Piper, very strangely, almost never lost, like, at all. He lost to Jimmy Snuka once on one of the house shows that they did, but 99.999% of the time in WWF, Piper either lost in a double disqualification, count out, match gets thrown off, or Piper won. Piper did not get beaten.
How come he never had the belt then?
Because Hogan only defended the belt against Piper one time in WWF and one time in WCW. And any other times it was just, entered a double DQ. That was it.
Wow.
So that made it weird because Piper refused point blank to ever lose to Hogan. No. Never, ever, ever. And can you imagine that these days if you had a top heel who's like, under no circumstances, and Kevin Owens goes, I am not going to lose to Roman Reigns no matter what. Of course you fucking are, like.
Do your job.
It's so strange to think that Piper, he was in a position because he was so strong, a lot of the business hinged on him, that he could say, not losing tonight.
I mean, I suppose you would still get that now. I mean, you might still get that now with people like Brock Lesnar or The Undertaker or Triple H, but big guys.
You'd have to pay him big, but Piper was just like, no, my value goes. And it's not just Piper, it was Hogan, a lot of guys at the time.
Yeah.
And that's why if you watch like a full WrestleMania from back in the day, the 80s or 90s, early 90s, it's like 20 matches on the card, like 2 of them have got to finish, the rest of them is all like DQ, count out. Oh, they thrown this one out, ref. It's just, I ain't fucking losing to him. I ain't fucking losing to him. That's just the way it was. And
wow.
It's easy to get yourself over as a big star if you're never going to fucking lose.
I guess so.
So this match with Roddy Piper breaking everyone's heart, but then being a good boy, but then losing his belt and crowning Bret, putting it on him one stud at a time. What do you think of this one then?
I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
There was it was some awkward lumbering moves.
Yeah, these guys aren't very good at getting out of the ring, were they? They kind of bounced against the ropes so many times.
Not just that, but like both Roddy mainly was worse for this, but like the occasional kick looking weak, some punches that missed,
whiffs.
Yeah, it was a little bit awkward, but I'd say for the storytelling, it's worth watching.
Yeah,
so I gave it 3.5 stars.
Nice. Does your star rating go up to 5, or is there a 6-star in there?
Much like Dave Meltzer, it's 5 officially, but who knows where this may lead.
You might just go into Just Eat territory and have that 6th star there.
Exactly.
Dave Meltzer and Just Eat flying in the face of star rating, established ruling everywhere. So Piper went away again for a bit, as he did, went off and made some other movies less good than They Live, and then came back again and really went back just to this point in 96. And this is an interesting point in wrestling time. This is a couple months before Austin does Austin 316 and before the Attitude Era starts to kind of get ushered in. This is when we're in the depths of the dark ages, when WWE has been rocked by scandals and all the big stars leaving. And even though Hogan and Savage and all these guys had left, Piper, when he would come back, he would still, come back to WWF. He was quite loyal at the time. So we got to see next a match which was really massively requested for being kind of really far ahead of its time and being really unique and being fucking crazy as shit. WrestleMania 12, Rowdy Roddy Piper taking on the enigmatic Goldust in a Hollywood backlot brawl. And the story of this one is that Goldust loves Rowdy Roddy Piper and essentially admits to his entire teenage years growing up being infatuated with Roddy Piper, even at one point saying, and when you smashed the coconut over Jimmy Snuka's head, I had an explosion of my own, like. So basically saying he's doing a wank to Roddy Piper promos back in the day.
Okay.
Goldust is obviously going to be his own episode.
Obviously.
How strange did you find Goldust here for being a wrestling character?
I find, because I know like nothing about Goldust, which is weird because he's a current wrestler.
You see him pop up now and then playing Pokemon Go.
Yeah, that's basically what I know him for. He plays Pokemon Go. So his whole character is like just really weird to me. Like I don't know what it's supposed to be. He's like a gold alien that is sexual. And I can't tell what his sexuality is because like he always hangs out with that woman in the gold dress.
Yeah.
But he always seems to be flirting with male wrestlers.
It's really,
so is he like bisexual? Like...
Kind of. They tried to have their cake and eat it with the Goldust character all the time. I mean, like the official line was that he was like an androgynous character who like used that and got on the heads of the male wrestlers by like coming on to them, but at the same time, I think it was that he was meant to be bisexual, because they did a thing where Marlena's wife was like, oh yeah, like, we have sex all the time, like, but then he would do things with his opponents where to get into their head. And essentially what it was is that WWE, in plain sight at the time, were like, we know that loads of male fans would be totally uncomfortable with this.
We know that loads of male fans are massively homophobic.
Yeah.
We want to tap into that market.
Basically, there's a base instinct with a load of our audience, which is like, oh no, go away, don't kiss me. And then Goldust is like, I'm gonna kiss you. And Roddy Piper's like, no. And then we've got a feud kind of on the basis of that. So definitely a unique gimmick, Goldust, and definitely one I can't wait to look at in full detail. So, the whole point in this match is that originally they wanted to have Roddy Piper fight, and I'm not shitting you, this is something they genuinely wanted to do, to have him fight O.J. Simpson, who obviously was in the public consciousness for all the wrong reasons at this one time.
Whose fucking great idea was that then?
Vince McMahon just thought it was a great idea.
Of course it was.
Yeah, so they didn't do that, thank God, but they did manage to allude to it heavily by having Roddy Piper chase Goldust, who is driving in a gold Cadillac, which I must admit, if there's ever a time where wrestlers have got vehicles that match their gimmick, I love that a lot. Unfortunately, Roddy Piper was not in a tartan Cadillac, he was in a white Bronco, so we got the obvious fucking nod of the car driving down the highway. Didn't get any police cars in there, though.
No.
Fucking ridiculous.
It starts off in an industrial estate, which, by the way, this match is exactly what I thought a street match would be.
A street fight, you mean?
Yeah. Sorry, is that not the... It's called a street fight, not a street match.
Street fight, not a street match.
So it becomes a fight when it's outside, but it's a match when it's in the ring.
Oh, no, there's not... Street match is something you've just... you've come up with.
Okay.
Street match could be a new thing that you can have the patent on.
All right, yeah.
Street fight is usually just when people use weapons. But yeah, what we have here is officially a Hollywood backlot brawl. But
he's
definitely...
in jeans.
He is. He's wearing jeans. He is.
Where's his kilt gone?
Unfortunately, Goldust is not wearing the denim catsuit, which would probably make it a street fight.
I think it'd have been great if he'd worn the catsuit and a pair of jeans over the top, and then Roddy had worn his kilt and a jeans underneath. And it could have been a street fight.
Roddy has rocked that look before, where he's come out with the kilt and taken off to have jeans when he's like, special guest referee. And like,
he's not really Scottish. That's how you can tell.
This match is fucking chaos.
It starts off with Piper literally standing in an industrial estate with a baseball bat. Goldust drives in his gold car. Piper hoses the car down. God knows why. That's not going to do anything.
The only reason why is to make it slippery, muddy, and more dangerous.
Yeah.
That's all it does, because they're on the hood of the car and they're going, Wah!
Then he beats up the car with the baseball bat.
He nearly kills Goldust by swinging to miss him, but then actually hitting him with the end of the handle of the baseball bat.
He hoses Goldust down. It looks fucking freezing where they are. It looks cold, wet, miserable. I feel really bad for Goldust because he's only wearing like a cat suit.
Yeah, and those poor gloves as well. Of all the things to wrestle in, this is most cumbersome. Like.
Meanwhile, Piper gets to wear jeans and a leather jacket, nice and cozy.
Imagine he's got the John Wick special lining in there as well, so he can reflect all the shots. So yeah, beats the shit out of poor Goldust, and then Goldust gets in the car and drives over Roddy Piper. So this is pretty much like, I like to think that Vince watched They Live and it's like, fuck it, let's just do it with Goldust. Because this is pretty, unless there's a pair of sunglasses in here, this is pretty much the same level of lads beating the shit out of each other. And Goldust is like, he's got gold paint and blood and dirt and mud, and they zip off in their cars and they drive away. They come back to the ring where Goldust works over Roddy Piper with sexy antics. Now, you've often asked kind of, hey, where's the male bra and panties matches? Where's the salacious sexual male matches?
Yeah.
This is as close as we get here, because we've got Roddy getting kissed by Goldust. Then Goldust, incenses Roddy by doing that, who then fires up, and then he does a little kiss on Goldust back. And it gets very confusing.
Very confusing. Like, what the message is here. So... Roddy, because I thought Roddy was really homophobic and he hates Goldust kissing him.
Because he says, I'm going to make a man out of you.
Yeah, but then he kisses him.
He gives him a little kiss, he does. And this is after Goldust goes for the powerbomb where he puts his hand all over his butt as well.
Yeah, give him a butt rub.
Get a handful of jeans.
Yeah.
And then Roddy strips him off his clothes.
Why does he do that?
And the bell just rings. There's no pinfall, so... I'm guessing the rules of a Hollywood backlot brawl, unwritten as they may be, are the first wrestler to strip their opponent down to their bra and panties will be declared the winner. And I guess what we have to ask is, did Piper have suspenders and stockings on underneath those jeans? We may never know, Joe.
I mean, I just assume he did.
That's Goldust's debut WrestleMania match. First match of WrestleMania.
Wow.
Wrestling a legend like Roddy Piper in the most uncomfortable gear imaginable.
I'm just saying, what, thong? He's got, like, suspender belt.
Weird kind of
garter.
dominatrix garter thing. It had hooks.
He's got, like, a corset thing on as well. All of those pieces of clothing on their own are fucking uncomfortable as shit, right?
You're wrestling in.
And then you're wrestling in them in the cold, wet, under a catsuit, which are also very uncomfortable. I have endless respect for Goldust there.
What a weird-ass match. And, Roddy gets the win, and he gets 2 kisses as well. So, what did you think of the Hollywood Backlot Brawl? It was
fucking weird. I'm so looking forward to How to Goldust, but I'm just imagining that every match of his now involves him being stripped down to his pants and bra.
As far as I know, that's the only one I can remember where that happens. Like,
I'm surprised Piper didn't give a smack on the butt, kind of like sexy. Oh, naughty boy.
He did grab his willy at one point, remember?
He did grab his willy.
He got to grab the old meat and 2 veg, and he gave it a clutch, didn't he? Yeah. Obviously, Goldust had not been taught the secret move by Joey Ryan. He's had to,
flex.
Just think back to Jimmy Snuka getting hit with a coconut, overpower him using the dong.
I am disappointed that this is the closest I'm going to get to a male bra and panties match, though. It's not what I wanted.
No, I mean, he can have this, or he can have, Paul Heyman and Jim Cornette once wrestled in an equivalent of a bra and panties match, but they're not exactly hunks, are they?
No.
Goldust as well, commitment to the gimmick, gold paint head to toe.
Yeah, another layer of uncomfort. The things that man does.
Seriously.
I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's a weird match. If you want to see an instance of how strange wrestling matches could be back in 1996, evidence of what came before the Attitude Era, but still kind of similar.
Is such kind of a...
Very, very similar, yeah.
Harken to what the Attitude Era was going to be at the time.
Just before we move on, I wanted to ask, what was Goldust and Roddy Piper's relationship in real life? Did they get on, or...?
As far as I know, they did. Okay. I know that Goldust was, he was under a lot of pressure because this was, a high-profile match at the time, because this was, when wrestling, the stars at the time, Shawn Michaels and Diesel weren't exactly, bringing in millions of people. Roddy Piper still had a lot of name value. Goldust was kind of an unknown. So I know there's a lot of pressure on him for this match, for it to be pulled off, and everyone was really happy with it, and he was held in quite high regard for having this match. As far as I know, they got on. I've never heard anything to the contrary of that, but...
Roddy's promos were just so convincing. I genuinely believed he hated him.
Yeah, Piper can turn on that switch, I guess. But to be honest, with Piper as a heel in the 80s with doing the race bait and stuff, him kind of just bringing people in that way. When Piper was a face, a lot of his stuff was kind of, it was that homophobic stuff, that kind of gay bashing kind of... you're not a man, I'm a man, I'm going to show you what a man's all about. Which
so weird, considering his early days in wrestling when he first started wearing a kilt and everyone was like, you're not a real man because you wear a skirt. And it's there's odd parallels here.
Odd parallels there.
But nothing learned from them.
No, I guess not, but it's a not just Roddy thing, it's a wrestling at the time. Yeah. They went full on with that. If you were effeminate and you were, not straight, that was viewed as being a thing that you could get heat off of, So Piper, like so many of his contemporaries in the late 90s, ended up being hoovered up and sent into WCW, who were just basically throwing away big money. And Piper didn't have a contract with WWF at the time. WCW were like, yo, you want a couple $1 million? All right. And the reason they brought him back was to do Icon versus Icon. Him versus Hogan. After Hogan had turned heel, they brought him in, did the whole storyline of the roles being reversed. Now Piper was the face, Hogan was the heel. Piper did beat Hulk Hogan, finally. He managed to beat him clean, but it was a match that was not for the title. And then when they had their match for the title, Hogan beat Piper clean.
Oh, of course.
So you could view this as being like a big 1980s circle jerk, and here we are in the late 90s when you got The Rock and Austin, all these new names coming in. You've got these two old boys from, over 10 years ago doing the same fucking gimmick, except they're 100 times slower and sucking wind everywhere. Not something that I was a fan of, and he had a lot of problems in WCW with the younger generation. He felt that the likes of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and...
so weird to think of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash
the younger generation. I know, right? But there were all these horror stories of them being like, you know, who the fuck are you, old man, and refusing to sell for him, and him being like, no, the finish of the match tonight is I win, and, you know, I beat up all you guys in, you know, 2 minutes. And there's a bad story where they had a tag match. It was meant to go like 15 minutes, and after 3 minutes Piper called for the finish, and it was for them to win, and it was just because he felt he was being disrespected, and he was paranoid. He didn't get on. He didn't have that nice relationship with the promoter maybe that he did have with people in the past, and he didn't feel comfortable there. It ended up just being like not a nice time. And I think a lot of the stuff of Piper in WCW is just kind of, he had creative control, we mentioned that before, where wrestlers are allowed to do whatever they want to, and as a result of that he just did a lot of boring, meandering shit, including in his build-up to his big match with Hulk Hogan. Roddy Piper thought it would be great to show him getting into the mindset of, you know, wanting to fight Hulk Hogan. He was going to get himself locked in Alcatraz prison.
What?
Yeah, he said, lock me in Alcatraz prison.
What's that got to do with Hulk Hogan's mind?
Because you have to be in the headspace. You have to get in there. I want to fight Hulk Hogan.
Has Hulk Hogan been to Alcatraz?
No, but I think...
Has Hulk Hogan been to prison?
No, but I think it was like a metaphorical jail as well as a literal jail.
Of course it was.
There is a great scene of Roddy Piper in the... It was decommissioned at this point, Alcatraz, folks. It wasn't an actual prison. Of Roddy Piper being let out of Alcatraz and him literally running through the courtyard going, ah! In his kilt going, ah! I'm free. Like it's the end of Shawshank Redemption.
Wow.
So, like, I think a big criticism of Piper around this time is that he took himself too fucking seriously.
Yeah.
But, again, loads of guys from the 80s struggled with that new crop of guys coming in. They didn't like it at all. It was around this time as well, and Piper's struggles with the new generation, and I think a lot of his struggles with him becoming, you know, less relevant at times, and there was a lot of dark shit happening in wrestling at the time, and there were a lot of wrestlers dying young. We got to see Piper's interview with HBO, where, Jesus Christ, it was depressing.
Oh.
And this is kind of like the difficulty with covering Piper, is that there's one moment you'll talk to Piper and he's like, you know, everyone's great, man. You know, my family, you know, I love wrestling, I love the WWE. You know, this man's been so good to me. And then you get like instances like this where it's like just the darkest fucking outlook. He is talking about everyone dying, promoters riding wrestlers until they drop. Everyone's out to get all the wrestlers. This is a fucking horrible, poisonous business. I mean, he's clearly a man who's struggled with depression, and like,
I would be surprised if it wasn't more severe than just depression as well.
A lot of the times about Piper having such bad relations with people, and I remember Piper coming back at WrestleMania 19, like, oh my god, here comes Piper. A couple of weeks later, off you go. No, Piper, persona non grata. He will never be in this fucking company again. Then 2 years later, hey, Piper's back! Hall of Fame way! Isn't Piper great? He's a big part of the family, and it's, you know, he went back and forth on him there a lot of times about his view on wrestling and WWE. He didn't have the nicest relationship with Vince a lot of the times. I think he resented him a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Roddy could honestly give you a straight answer about what he felt about the wrestling business and WWE and Vince McMahon.
I imagine he was a very confused man in that respect. There's probably a lot of conflicting thoughts and emotions there in terms of, it's his family, it's what raised him, it's what provided him with ways to afford to eat and have a roof over his head, but in other respects, you know, all the abuse, all the hazing.
And I think Piper as well, and we mentioned the ear, but Piper, you know, you've been in a career, he was wrestling for pretty much 30 years and, you know, quite a big schedule sometimes. And even though he left and came back a lot, you're talking about a guy who had, you know, hip transplants, broke his legs, broke his ankles, broke his wrists. You know, he broke everything you could fucking break. He was a man who was sore. And he couldn't touch his retirement. You know, he was always a big vocal proponent of the fact that wrestlers, you know, once you're in your 40s or your 50s, that's it. You're on the scrap heap. And there you say, you know, there's no retirement plan for wrestlers. And Piper, you know, he had a lot of retirement funds and all that, but he couldn't access them until he was in his 60s.
Oh, jeez.
And he's kind of, you know, he felt a lot of the time that he had to go out there and he had to wrestle and he had to do the stuff. And I kind of feel bad for him in that front. I mean, it's nice now. It always warms my heart when I hear, you know, in NXT, that they teach the guys how to open a fucking pension, how to save your money, how to budget, how to make sure you've got enough money coming in, you don't just blow all your money,
That's
how
really
to make
good.
sure your money is safe. You know, Piper, when he was in his early 20s, was making, you know, like $500,000.
What?
$500,000, no family, no real close friends, no home per se, on the roads 350 days a year with the likes of Ric Flair and fucking everyone else. You know, that money was just going straight on. That was, you know, the 80s when partying was a big thing in wrestling. So, you know, a lot of Piper's demons as well, you got to bear in mind, is that he's a guy who had some real rough times, but he was going hard in the old drugs.
Yeah.
You know, there are stories of people coming into a hotel room with a king-size bed and a mound of cocaine just gets opened up onto it and just shoved it into their faces. They went hard back in those 1980s and those 1970s. I'm so glad wrestling's not like that anymore.
Seriously. Oh, think of all my nice boys with horrible drug addictions.
I mean, you know, there's people who are like, kind of, you know, wrestling used to be like when real tough guys used to go out party. Now they just all play video games.
How dare they have long, healthy careers, hopefully, and families.
I like that Xavier Woods has got 1 million subscribers on YouTube as opposed to squandering $1 million on cocaine. And that's probably not an exaggeration.
Exactly.
You know? I'm so happy that, like, you know, wrestlers have learned from that old style of that lifestyle was so fucking harsh.
I'm really glad, most of all, even more so than like learning that it's bad, but like the fact that there was this culture back then of like, oh, you're not a real man unless you partake in the partying and the drugs and the long fucking rough hours.
Yeah. I mean, look back at Mr. Perfect.
Yeah.
And one thing I always say, it's so sad that Piper passed when he did. I think before he had a chance to really give back in the ways that he could have given back. But I was always really happy that, you know, when this DVD came out and Piper was able to come on and do cool segments, and, you know, Piper could still do a Piper's Pit here and there and give back and mean stuff to fans. And I'm so happy that he got that. You know, he was able to do that as opposed to some of the wrestlers from the 80s like Rick Rude or Mr. Perfect, who's just, boom, they're gone.
Yeah.
Cocaine overdose, that's it, the end. And you never get to learn, you know, about them or them get to reflect. Piper doing Piper's Pit with Stone Cold Steve Austin, for instance, was a segment we watched.
So cool.
That's so lovely just to see him. Like, that's what people loved about Piper, him being able to do that, just slapping Steve Austin in the face. Did you like him responding to the what chants?
I did. I think it takes real skill to overcome a what chant, because that's a rough chant, that is. Seriously,
try and keep up. Like.
Yeah. What are you, deaf?
Don't make me repeat myself. I'm not gonna do that again, okay? Some of the other ones we watched like Piper with the Shield, for instance. And I thought that was so cool seeing tough Roman Reigns going, "Why don't you get out of here, old man, before I break your ass?" And I'm like, oh, how could you say that to him? Or he did some great ones with John Cena, where there was a time where people thought Cena was going to turn heel. And Piper did this promo and he's like, you know, it's the corniest thing ever, which is basically, you mean so much to these people. Don't you dare, you know, embrace the hate, John Cena. And he did, but like it was all goosebumps and all the kids were like, "Oh, Roddy, you're so right, John is our boy." And is him able to do that? Like he could turn on that switch. And a lot of wrestlers from that time couldn't do that because they would come from a time where it's all off the top of the head, and then you come in and you read out a script and it's like awkward and shitty. Piper was really good at doing a script because he was doing movies like 99% of the time. So that was really nice. And another really cool thing that I think symbolizes Piper and the relationship with the fans. This is one of the sweetest stories ever. Around 2006, 2007, they were doing this gimmick at the time where fans could vote on the matches for a pay-per-view. It was called Cyber Sunday. So you went on WWE.com, you voted for who wants to be, you know, in this match with these guys. And Ric Flair was feuding with the tag team champions. And you got to vote in which legend would wrestle with Ric Flair to take on these guys for the tag team championship. And Piper was in no shape to wrestle. He was, you know, hadn't wrestled in years. He looked terrible. But the fans voted in Rowdy Roddy Piper. And they won the tag team championships on a fluke. And they held them for one night, Piper and Flair. It was fucking awesome. But the lovely thing about that was that by the fans voting in Roddy Piper, he had to do a pre-match physical. And because he did a pre-match physical, they actually found out that Roddy Piper had lymphoma.
Oh my God.
Which is a form of blood cancer. And because of that pre-match physical, they were able to catch it in time. And Roddy was actually able to get his treatment. And he was safe and he was able to overcome it. And, you know, that was something that could have really taken him before his time.
When was that then?
2007, I think, thereabouts.
Yikes.
So he's always said, like, thank you to the fans because you literally saved my life. I think that's fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
And when I saw him live, you know, he could talk the hind legs off a donkey, but when he was talking about his relationship with the fans, like, it was so fucking genuine. Like, he really loved the fans, and he made time. Every single person he met that night, he shook their hands, he fucking chatted with them. He said I was beautiful. I don't know if you've seen the picture I posted on Instagram and on Twitter, but me and Roddy, like, I'm like total fanboy doing the point, and he's looking at me like he's my nan, and I love it. I love it. It looks like I'm sitting on his knee.
It does,
and I love it so fucking much.
It's so cute. It's nice to hear that he's like nice. Worst when you hear the wrestlers are not nice people.
Yeah,
really.
when they're like jerks or like standoffish and stuff like that. I think, you know, Piper had a lovely relationship with the fans. That was really lovely. Rowdy Roddy Piper then, definitely a controversial career. What were your overall impressions of the man? Was he, as someone who was often, you know, claimed to be the best on the mic and the absolute wordsmith, did he impress you on the mic? I mean,
yeah. No, definitely. I do agree he probably is the best on the mic of all time. Like, really, I mean, how can you argue with that when he's had such a prolific career in that respect throughout time? And the fact that he kept that up right until his death, basically, like, those are the kinds of skills you could imagine you could lose quite easily.
Yeah.
He didn't keep on top of it.
And I think there were one or two times where Piper did do the rambly promo. And it was kind of sad.
Yeah.
But
considering, I mean, like, the thing that really impressed me most about it is the fact that he manages to stay mostly very coherent, even with all the drug abuse and the horrible circumstances in his life and the injuries and everything like that. There's a huge amount of stuff that happens to a wrestler, I think, that goes against their ability to talk well.
Yeah, that's true.
And to communicate well. And the fact that he managed to keep that, I think, is really amazing.
The wrestling itself, though, when he was in the ring, what did you think of him?
You know, he's not the best wrestler in the world, as everyone will say.
He's
ain't
no Mr. Perfect or on heart or anything.
But he's not shit.
Yeah.
He's not like, oh my God, that was... Well, I mean, maybe to be fair, there's probably a lot of matches he's done that were like, that was awful. I never want to see that again. But like, on the whole, I thought he was good. For
new fans who will be checking it out, what were the kind of things that you thought were kind of essential viewing? What do you think were the important things about Roddy Piper for a new fan to maybe get to grips with?
So the things that we've covered in this episode, I would say definitely watch They Live, in terms of seeing a wrestler do a cool-ass movie, also as an excuse to watch They Live, because it's a great movie and you should watch it regardless of Roddy Piper or wrestling. Just watch They Live. Please watch They Live. It's so good.
Put the glasses on, will you? Jesus, come on.
I think his weird dog collar match is worth watching because it's just so strange to see that era of wrestling do something so violent and gory and gimmicky. I think watching his Piper's Pit with Steve Austin is really great, just to see how well he held up with the changing environment of wrestling and how it evolved, and keeping up with someone like Steve Austin, who is also seen as, you know, one of the best on the mic.
Absolutely. I mean, I would definitely say if you can find any of like the kind of the compilations of Piper's Pits and all the weird little bits here and there, always try and go your way to check those out, because it's just weird to see how unhinged and off kilter like wrestling was even back then, when they're kind of saying, hey, it's a show, this is sports entertainment, we're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes, and here's Roddy Piper like fucking punching people out of the blue going, and we're doing this now, you know. And, you know, check out, you know, some of those Piper's Pits. I think it's just worth as well, you know, as a new fan, you know, just don't always just assume the WWE's version of telling you things, because their production values are so good and it's all there in the network in a nice neat little package to kind of go, here's Roddy Piper, and that's it in 2 minutes. But like, it is worth having that discussion. You know, and by no means I think we did set up this episode to like try and get Roddy Piper, and
I hate that we even have to talk about, but we have to.
You have to, though.
It'd be bad podcasts if we didn't cover that
it would be.
fucking issue.
And I think it's an issue that we're not just pointing the finger at Roddy Piper. I think we're kind of looking at wrestling as a whole in that time frame, and do kind of have those discussions and do kind of think about that. I think it's a discussion that needs to be had, and I think it's better to have an intelligent discussion about it than to be like WWE and just kind of pivot it with a nice, well-produced music video that kind of makes out that wrestling wasn't like this at the time. You know?
Don't be like WWE and try and sweep all that shit under the rug. Let's be honest as a community in acknowledging the fact that wrestling has had its horrible past and needs to constantly work on that to overcome that.
I think that's super important as well, because when shit like the Hulk Hogan tape comes out. And shit like that's always going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's always going to happen. But when shit like that happens, then it doesn't feel like wrestling is this like fucking grubby little club where we're all like locked away in this bubble and
In denial
in
about.
total denial. Yeah. What really irked a lot of people is like when the stuff with Hogan came out, and then there was all these articles on like Vice and The Guardian and Grantland, all these like big media organizations were writing these kind of wrestling's problem with racism, and honestly oftentimes it was them not doing a great job at it. They were just kind of picking out all these random moments here and there and kind of going, wrestling as a whole is racist. And I think they actually are more free to do that when we as wrestling fans and we as a community refuse to discuss these issues. I think if we're actually a little bit more open about it, then when stuff like this comes out, and it will, that we're more prepared as a community to defend ourselves.
And more educated to be able to discuss it coherently and respectfully.
Yeah.
I think They Live is actually a really good like analogy for wrestling.
Yeah.
Only like almost in reverse. So like it's almost like when you take the sunglasses off, they're like rose tinted spectacles.
Nostalgia
We're gonna
glasses,
take them off and be like, see wrestling for what it really was. At points, which is skeletons, racist skeletons, all the way back.
I mean, Roddy Piper is definitely one where, I mean, I could watch a cocaine-fueled Roddy Piper promo for days on end. You watching Roddy Piper sweating profusely, smashing beer bottles over his face, going, sheep-hearters, let me tell you. You know, there's an energy there with Piper that you don't see in wrestling anymore. There is a spark there. There's I guess a genuineness there, where this is a guy who was brought up by wrestling. He is a product of the wrestling business from the 1970s and 1980s. And I think there are not people like Roddy Piper anymore, because wrestling's not like that anymore. No. But he was very much our link with that past of wrestling, and I'm sad that he's gone. I was really upset when Roddy passed.
I think the main thing I'm most sad about him passing, and I know I say this with every wrestler we've covered that's died before their time, is the fact, it's the impact he could have had on like current wrestling now as a trainer. The way he could have given all that insight to new wrestlers in terms of how to act on the mic and have presence in the ring. And really developing your character in terms of not only how to be really likable, but how to really make people hate you.
Absolutely.
He would do things like he'd make his entrance extra long so that the audience would get pissed off before the match had even started.
I mean, you see Piper coming in, like, you know, at WrestleMania 1 and 2, there's people throwing shit in the ring. Like, you know, there's that level of healery. That's why I love when I see like a Kevin Owens, you know, these days doing something really despicable and nasty. I always just get a twinge of that's like Piper. Piper is sorely missed. It's really sad that he went when he did, like only 60 so years old, really, really tragically young. His book, which was started by him and then finished by his children, I'm actually halfway through reading it at the moment. It's called Rowdy, and I can only give him my highest recommendation in terms of really trying to tell this man's story. Piper's often had a strange relationship with the truth, but you can't deny that he was an important part of wrestling and one of the all-time greats on that microphone, probably the greatest of all time.
You know what's really nice is thinking of a person in similar circumstances to what Roddy was in when he was 15, like leaving home, coming from an abusive household and going, I'm going to get into wrestling because it's the only option I have. And thinking of the environment that they would be in now as opposed to the environment that he and others in that sort of scenario would have been in the 70s and the 80s. They would be welcomed now. There wouldn't be all that the same level of hazing and abuse. It's a nice, you've got Finn Balor playing Lego. Kevin Owens might take you to the zoo.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's going to happen. It's like, that bastard Finn Balor, he said we were going to record a Let's Play, but what actually he did was he left me at Toys R Us when he went across the road to buy a new Lego Star Wars
Whatever.
set.
I'll go play Pokemon Go with Goldust.
I had to walk over a minute to find him. And then he explained everything and asked if I was okay. So that's going to do it for How to Piper. I think it's time to get into some of the tweets and Facebook posts and see what you guys in the How to universe have to say about the Hot Scott.
He's garbage. He's like where he comes from. Nothing but garbage where he comes from. Same thing with your world's heavyweight champion. You're talking garbage. This guy comes out 280 pounds, and all of a sudden everybody in Boston is standing up and cheering and talking about Hulkamania. Hot Rod walks out, and all of a sudden everybody's booing, thinking Hot Rod ain't going to stand no chance. After all, Hot Rod, he's the only guy. All he's ever done was actually destroy Jimmy Snuka, our legend. All he's ever done is actually destroy Andre the Giant. Unless someone was to sucker me, they could never get an even shot at me. I bounced the world on my little fingertips. And then all of a sudden Hot Rod goes into Boston and he becomes victorious. I actually beat the champion, but no, you don't want to give me the belt. No. Let me tell you something, mister. I am the boss. I'm the one that's going back in there for the rematch. Not because I won it. Because the champion wants it. Because I made him look like a fool. They raised my hand. I'm the first man to ever beat the champion. I am the champion. Boston.
Thank you very much, Rowdy Roddy Piper.
I am
Fans,
the true
stay tuned. More action after this. Take his blood.
So Jay Horner says on Twitter he was ahead of his time. The prototype for wrestlers like CM Punk on the mic and Steve Austin in the ring. That's a really interesting point. I actually wanted to ask you about that. Would you say then the likes of, my kind of favourite wrestlers, Chris Jericho, Seth Rollins, those kinds of like really braggy, nasty heels who like have all that in-ring mic skills, does that all come from Roddy Piper?
Oh yeah, I mean Roddy Piper would be like... See, here's the thing about great talkers in wrestling. Okay, if you look at Hulk Hogan, was considered to be a great talker at the time because he could talk for years, he could talk for miles. But Hogan was just doing Superstar Billy Graham, and Superstar Billy Graham was just doing Muhammad Ali. There are so many wrestlers who are great talkers who are unfortunately derivative of other wrestlers. They've gotten the idea from somewhere else, they've tweaked it, they made it their own, they made it better. Roddy Piper, though, there was no one like him beforehand, and I'd argue to say there's been a lot of people like him since. In terms of someone who has inspired others on the mic, Roddy Piper is like standing up there on his own because there was no one else like Roddy Piper beforehand who was doing that on the mic and talking like that and had that kind of pace and that cadence and that wild, mad energy. He was totally unique. And yet he inspired a whole generation after him. So I would say, yeah, Roddy is probably the most influential talker on the mic of all time.
And with regards to then Steve Austin in the ring, would you say that kind of brawling style again kind of originated from Piper?
That's harder to say, I guess, because that was more to do with Austin having to address the limitations of what he had at the time.
But I mean, having someone like Piper who's like considered one of the best, having that before him, do you think that made his transition to becoming a brawling style wrestler easier?
I mean, I would say yes, but Steve Austin would probably say, be that as it may, things were what they were. A lot of maybe the crowd a little bit sweeter for Steve Austin than Roddy Piper. They did say what quite a few times, even though he instructed them to stop, but they did it anyway. He wouldn't give you a straight answer. But I definitely think Roddy, like... He, in terms of his influence on the mic, second to none. No one has influenced more people than he did.
Brain Baird says, the bromance between him and Hacksaw on Legends House made me more of a fan than They Live. I've not seen much Legends House. Is there a bromance there? Because if so, I need to watch it. I love bromance.
I was going to watch some Legends House for this, but honestly, Legends House is a bit of a hard watch in some respects. It's really sweet when you see Roddy in it become such a close friend with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who was a wrestler from the 80s at the time as well. And Roddy, when he goes into Legends House, doesn't get on well at all. And it's basically like they almost play it up like kind of, oh, what's this guy? He's kind of wacky. He don't talk with anyone. But it's like Roddy's like clearly like depressed and he like wanders out of the house in the middle of the night.
Oh,
he won't talk to anyone. He's really antisocial. But over the course of the show, when they're living in this house together, him and Hacksaw just start kind of palling around a bit, and it's so fucking sweet and lovely to see them being mates, basically, because Roddy kind of he's real defensive, and he said it himself in the past. It comes from that upbringing of being on the streets when he was a young kid, of kind of everyone's out to get me. He reverts to that very quickly. When things are kind of hard or tough for him, he always kind of went back into his shell a bit, kind of one-man island, and it was just so lovely in that Legends House to see him and Hacksaw form that relationship. But yeah, I didn't watch Legends House because it's a bit hard going. Honestly, since his passing, I've not watched Legends House because I watched it beforehand and I was kind of like, this is hard. I think watching afterwards, it's going to be even tougher. But I think it's something we will watch eventually.
Insta619 says, not wrestling related exactly, but he was my favourite character on Saints Row 4. I didn't know he was on Saints Row 4.
Oh yeah, he's in Saints Row 4, and you get to fight him in an alleyway, just like in in They Live. Yeah,
it's amazing how much of a sort of cultural impact he's had on even like young fans.
Absolutely,
the fact that like young fans growing up will actually know him from all these like random things like It's Always Sunny, Saints Row, They Live.
He's managed to keep himself in the public consciousness in such a cool way. When you look at Hulk Hogan
Yeah.
and how everyone knows him, but with a groan and kind of
Kevin, he was in Santa with Muscles. That's the coolest film ever made.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Can we just talk about that in WCW?
Yeah, let's just for 1 second.
One bit of a side
Whoa,
here.
backtrack.
When they did Icon versus Icon in WCW, like Hogan was like, I'm a bigger Hollywood star than you, brother. I've been in big Hollywood movies. And Piper's just kind of like, yeah, you were.
Yeah, on the one hand, you've got, Hulk Hogan, who was, did classics like Santa with Muscles. And, you've got shit movies like John Carpenter's They Live,
Well, John Carpenter's They Live is just a poor man's Three Ninjas High Noon on Mega Mountain, really, at the end of the day, isn't it?
Gurkuman says, many people say that wrestlers will say anything to get a reaction, but Roddy Piper may be the one wrestler who literally would.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, as we've talked about.
Fatty500 says, Piper was talented on the mic and solid in the ring, which unfortunately detracts from the fact that he refused to lose and cut racist promos.
Yeah, I think the refusing to losing thing was something that I always, couldn't get to grips with, because I only found out this stuff when I first got to know about Roddy, in the 2000s, looking back retrospectively. I was like, you can't refuse to lose in the what? And he was like, yeah, he didn't get pinned for 17 years. It was incredible. Amazing
Pseudo says, don't know how much you like reality shows, but Piper did an episode of Wife Swap with Ric Flair, if you're into that. And of course, as we mentioned at the very beginning, very briefly, yes, I was aware. It's the only thing I knew him from. And coming out of that, I will say, Piper seemed like a great dad.
He did, and, you can count on your hand, if you've had a few fingers amputated, the number of wrestlers with happy marriages who've stayed with them their entire lives. And Piper is lived in his home in the mountains of Portland since the year dot, and he always was taking time off to go back and to be there with his family, and his kids speak so highly of him, and his wife spoke so highly of him. You look at him, you look at, say, Hogan, for instance, not to say it's not necessarily the same equivalence, but you can just see how it's very easy if you're a guy who's making that kind of money, you're that kind of star, to lose touch with your family and lose touch with to not be grounded, really.
Especially with the family he grew up with.
Yeah, and the background that he had. You kind of think that Piper would be like, well, fuck, I don't need a family. And the fact that he settled down like that was always really quite a heartwarming thing, I thought.
That is, it's nice to know.
So I got this from Christopher Hollinshead, who requested this episode over on patreon.com/howtowrestling. The original loose cannon gimmick. You never knew what Roddy Piper was going to do next. He was wild and unhinged, and we became hypnotized by him because of it. Think of all the guys from the Hulk Hogan era. How many of them got stale over the years and became irrelevant? How many of them have not aged very well? Even Hogan himself had become a reviled and controversial character in the world of wrestling and in real life. Piper, despite his flaws, despite his strangeness, despite his shape physically, never got stale to us. All Roddy Piper had to do to get us to cheer was to walk out with a microphone in his hand, and he had us in the palm of his hands. He was Roddy Piper. Don't you wish you were too? All being all, Roddy Piper was probably one of the more challenging episodes that we've done. And I think when I saw Piper was coming up in the schedule, I was like, yes, Roddy Piper, yeah. Get to talk about him and Frankie Williams. And in reality, looking up on it and looking up on Piper's past, looking up on all the stuff, it was quite challenging to wrap our heads around it, particularly for a new fan's perspective. What I will say is, if you want to know more about Roddy and kind of his life and the stuff that we were talking about, he did a 2-part interview with Steve Austin. That was really, really great. I think you should check that out. He did a 2-parter as well with Cole Cabana on the art of wrestling, which is also really, really good. He has done a lot of podcasts. He even had his own one himself.
Wow.
I would suggest you check some of those out, because no one can tell his story quite like himself. He is difficult to understand sometimes, unfortunately. Piper is a notorious slur of his words and a notorious mumbler and a grumbler. We were left wanting subtitles during this this documentary. But Roddy Piper's biography that's just come out, I would give that a strong recommendation as well. But thank you so much to Christopher Hollinshead for requesting this episode. Thanks to everyone who tweeted in with match recommendations, with suggestions, with thoughts. And if you've got any feedback about this episode or thoughts on stuff we've talked about today, tweet us in using the hashtag HowToPiper. Let us know your thoughts, and let's keep this conversation going about Rowdy Roddy Piper. I'm very happy to announce our next episode is going to be one which, well, I'm not happy, sorry, I was about to go, I'm happy to announce this next episode will make Joe fucking miserable. But this next episode is going to be one that is designed solely to test the iron will of Joanna Graham. We've been given a request on Patreon for Joe to look at specifically long matches. Now, over in Cinema Swirl, young Sam Chaplin gripes anytime a movie goes over a certain running time, and there seems to be a theory with new fans that they've not got the stomach for a long match anymore, because the current product kind of tends to go towards short 15 or so minute matches at best.
Which I must say, I prefer.
Now, you think that you're not going to enjoy this.
Yeah. I'm trying to think how many matches I've seen which would run over like...
I think maybe AJ and Cena is the only one from recent memory, I think.
Yeah, and I'm guessing not all of the long matches are going to be as good as that.
So, here's the deal. We're going to try and get a golden 4, because we want to have this out in the next year or so. We want to have 4 matches. The rule is, because I've been chatting backwards and forwards with the person who's requested this, the rule is we can't do Iron Man matches, which is most number of pinfalls within a set amount of time, because that is essentially cheating, because you get to have loads of falls and loads of things happen in between. Right? There's an Iron Man match with Randy Orton and John Cena where at one point Randy Orton goes, "Woo-ha-ha," and lets off loads of fireworks. Not those types of matches. We're talking matches that have a run time of 45 minutes and up. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a match from ye olden times. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, an ancient, dusty old match. It could be matches from current product. It could be matches from the indies, Ring of Honor. Think outside the box. It could be a match from Japan. What I want to see are the 4 matches that best exemplify that wrestling can tell a long-form story over the course of around 45 minutes to an hour. Okay, that's the kind of where we're looking for here. Joe's got a look on her face as if to say, of course wrestling can't tell a long-form story over that length of time. What, are you mad?
I know, the only instance I've heard of like long matches is that one which Daniel Bryan tried to do, which was like 3 hours long.
He's talking about like, an hour or two when everyone was leaving. I knew I didn't have them, but yeah. We're looking for that, okay? We're not looking for matches where like they're so comedically long it's ridiculous. Don't send in Chris Hero wrestling for like 900 hours, whatever the fuck it was he did for charity recently. But how to long matches, use that hashtag, send in the recommendations, and more importantly, your thoughts. Are you of the opinion that matches need to be longer? You need to have a long match to tell a long story? Or are you someone like, I've had people who run very successful wrestling podcasts, very well known in the wrestling media world, tell me if I had my way, it would be entrances, finishes, and music, and that's it. Are you of that opinion? Is it just short, bombastic, or do you want to see that story? I am of the opinion that you can have those matches. Okay. But I'll also be of the opinion that I struggle to think of 4. So fucking help me! Help me! Hashtag how to long matches. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of How To Wrestling. And thank you so much for everyone who tweeted in to help make How To Piper a reality. And a big shout out once again to our main man, Christopher Hollinshead. If you are listening on iTunes, SoundCloud, or on Stitcher Radio, please make sure you are subscribed. Leave us a rating or review. Help us get up the charts. Go back and check out all our other episodes. And you can follow us on Twitter at How To Wrestling or on Facebook.com/How To Wrestling. And special shout out mention, if you're not already, give us a follow on Instagram for some visual joy, videos, goofs, gaffs. It's Instagram.com/How To Wrestling.
And you can find us on Patreon, as I'm sure you already know. We have a variety of tiers to suit any backer's needs, starting from as little as $1 to receive our episode notes, and $5 which will get you access to our monthly pay-per-view reviews, of which there are over 20 episodes available now, leading right back to SummerSlam 2015, right when we first started this little podcast.
Yeah, all the way back when, in the olden times when Jon Stewart thought it was a good idea to interfere in the main event. I'm still not over it, folks. No. I'm still not over. But yeah, if you become a $5 backer, you get instant access to all that backlog. So if you only want to become a backer for 1 month and check it out and see what the content is like, you can get access to everything immediately. If you become a $10 backer, you get to join us for our live streams, live streaming WWE 2K17, a little bit of Yakuza 0, and as well with the $10 backing, if you're not able to catch the live stream as it goes off, I've actually set it up now so the entire backlog of all the live streams are archived there. All you have to do is click on the featured tags, you get immediate access. They're all on YouTube. As a backer, you get access to all of those old live streams going all the way back to when we started this bad boy. For $50, you can become our backer and request an episode. Are you looking to get someone the best ever birthday gift? Well, then this is a great way of doing it. Become a $50 backer, request an episode, we'll put it in the lineup. You get to get an episode of How To Wrestling requested and get us to show Joe a wrestler, a topic, whatever it is you need Joe to see and new fans to learn about. we will do an episode on. We love each and every one of our Patreon backers, and thank you everyone who's backing us so far, and we can't wait to provide you guys with more and more awesome content on patreon.com/HowToWrestling. And as well, don't forget, for all your How To Wrestling needs, your main hub and your main source of all of this is HowToWrestling.com. You got articles, episodes, artwork and discussions all about the lovely world of How To Wrestling at HowToWrestling.com. But until our next episode, #HowToLongMatches, it's a goodbye from me, Kevin.
And a goodbye from me, Joe.
And we'll catch you next time on How To Wrestling. Just when you think we got the ending to this podcast, I changed the fact that I don't have a way to make this pun sound good. Damn it, I'll never be Roddy Piper. Damn it.
See ya.